Hello guys, welcome back to my channel and enjoy this fanfic part 2. Now let's start the fanfic. I sat cross-legged on the humid ground. Distractedly, I spun my chakra, letting it flow freely in a way that resonated with the water around me. The dew rose from the grass, following with familiarity my will, and spun around me lazily, the drops thinning and thinning until a light mist covered the clearing. That hadn't required me more energy than a single kawarimi. I smiled, looking around to take in the result. My chakra affinity was water, and I had discovered it years before. The 2 levels of nature manipulation explained into the scrolls of Konoha's shinobi section of the library came to me with little difficulty. Surprisingly, I had my mind set on flowing with your emotions, basing myself more on waterbending than the actual chakra manipulation. My chakra passed through the mist like a net, and on it some of the water condensed. I brought my hands together, forming a rough cup, which filled itself with crystal clear fresh water. I drank it, relishing in my success. Protected in the mist, I took off my fingerless glove and brought my arm forward, and started collecting the chakra in my hand. Hands are complex things, in my informed opinion at least. Areas of the human hand include the palm, which is the central region of the anterior part of the hand, located superficially to the metacarpus. The skin in this area contains dermal papillae to increase friction, such as are also present on the fingers and used for opisthanar area. Dorsal is the corresponding area on the posterior part of the heel of the hand as the area anteriorly to the bases of the metacarpal bones, located in the proximal part of the palm. It is the area that sustains most pressure when using the palm for support, such as in handstand. There are 5 digits attached to the hand, notably with a nail fixed to the end in place of the normal claw. The 4 fingers can be folded over the palm, which allows the grasping of objects. The thumb, connected to the first metacarpal bone and trapezium, is located on one of the sides, parallel to the arm. A reliable way of identifying human hands is from the presence of opposable thumbs. Opposable thumbs are identified by the ability to be brought opposite to the fingers. A muscle action is known as opposition. The skeleton of the human hand consists of 27 bones. The 8 short carpal bones of the wrist are organized into a proximal row, scaphoid, lunate, triquetralanpiciform, which articulates with the bones of the forearm, and a distal row, trapezium, trapezoid, capitate, and hamate, which articulates with the bases of the 5 metacarpal bones of the hand. The heads of the metacarpals will each in turn articulate with the bases of the proximal phalanx of the fingers and thumb. These articulations with the fingers are the metacarpophalangeal joints known as the knuckles. At the palmar aspect of the first metacarpophalangeal joints are small, almost spherical bones called the sesamoid bones. The 14 phalanges make up the fingers and thumb and are numbered IV, thumb to little finger, when the hand is viewed from an anatomical position, palm up. The 4 fingers each consist of 3 phalanx bones, proximal, middle, and distal. The thumb only consists of a proximal and distal phalanx. Together with the phalanges of the fingers and thumb, these metacarpal bones form 5 rays or polyarticulated chains. Because supination and pronation, rotation about the axis of the forearm, are added to the 2 axes of movements of the wrist, the ulna and radius are sometimes considered part of the skeleton of the hand. There are numerous sesamoid bones in the hand, small ossified nodes embedded in tendons. The exact number varies between people, whereas a pair of sesamoid bones are found at virtually all thumb metacarpophalangeal joints. Sesamoid bones are also common at the interphalangeal joint of the thumb and the metacarpophalangeal joints of the little finger and the index finger. In rare cases, sesamoid bones have been found in all the metacarpophalangeal joints and all distal interphalangeal joints except that of the long finger. The articulations are interphalangeal articulations of hand, the hinge joints between the bones of the digits, metacarpophalangeal joints, where the digits meet the palm, intercarpal articulations, where the palm meets the wrist. And more than that, On each hand there were 57 tenketsus. Well, there were only 7 that one could channel his chakra through, the others were far too small, and they worked more, reacting to what you did with the 7 you had control over than anything else. That was why hand seals made sense. Compressing the tenketsus of the hands in certain patterns while channeling chakra corked some tenketsus while letting others outpour chakra, the movements of the chakra on your hands reverberated, resonated, echoed, along with your coils, shaping your chakra in a way that for each set of hand seals was optimal for a certain jutsu. That was why every jutsu felt a little bit forced when performed, at least in comparison to a seal-less one. Then it came to the Rasengan, and it took me 6 months to learn it. It was a headache under the form of a happy blue thingy. Rasengan required extremely refined chakra control, but not only that, it required the ability to sustain the charging phase of the jutsu. This meant that you place your hand under a lot of stress and run the risk of rupturing your hand, chakra coils. For those reasons is difficult to master. At 12, Naruto managed to learn it bullheading his way through. That is to say that a deaf person can learn how to play a song on the piano if he copies the movements enough times. Naruto had enhanced healing thanks to his status as Jinchuriki, and enough raw chakra that he didn't have to bother with the control part. To help others gain the necessary chakra control, learning to use the Rasengan was broken into 3 steps. Rotation, the user learned to spin their chakra in multiple directions at once. To help in this regard, users may be given a water balloon so that they can mark their progress by the churning water. This step was complete once the users are able to burst the balloon with their chakra. The user needs to know which direction their body naturally spins its chakra for this step. Power. The user must increase the volume and density of chakra they output. To help in this regard, users may be given a rubber ball. There is no water inside to help them burst the exterior and the rubber shell was thicker than a balloon's. Containment. The user must combine the first 2 steps into a contained sphere. To help in this regard, users may be given a balloon to help them visualize the intended shape. If the balloon is popped or otherwise moves, mastery is not yet achieved. I had the greatest difficulties in the second step. If it is because I naturally poured out less chakra than necessary or because I disliked the idea of breaking rubber balls was still unclear. Managing to do it all in secret hadn't been easy either. I didn't want Jiraiya of the Sannin coming to know that someone bought water balloons and rubber balls in bulk, so I stole one here and there, leaving the money in the pockets of the owner. It had been a good training method, but in my team I was the one specialized in subterfuge. As such, pickpocketing was right down my alley. Slowly but surely, a spiraling ball of bright light blue chakra formed in my palm. And once it stabilized itself, I stopped pouring chakra into the jutsu. It was honestly beautiful. The deep humming of it was soothing too. I grimaced at the thought of it grinding through meat and bones like it was designed to do. I let the technique dissipate. I wanted to try and create a Sweden Rasengan, but I knew that the first attempts would probably backfire spectacularly, and for that reason, I needed to be able to produce a Kage Bunshin. Sadly, it was a kinjutsu, and as such, not only it wasn't common knowledge, but if I suddenly came to know it, it would have raised questions. With a twist of my wrist, some of the mist condensed into a razor-sharp, tiny wire, and cut off a leaf from a tree over my head. I tried to turn the cutting tool into a flowing current that the leaf should have sailed to reach my hand, but I managed to drench the leaf and making it fall faster. My intent was still not well meshed with the shape manipulation of Sweden chakra. But considering that it was something I had never heard about before, it was pretty cool. I reached over for the leaf and brought it among my closed palms. My mind drifted to windy thoughts. A gale, a kite, the meadows flattening under the force of the wind, trees being uprooted, branches lightly dancing and leaves delicately twirling. Then I turned my attention inward, and focused on the chakra in my hands. Making it sharp, and grinding one against the other, sharpening it further. I pictured the edge of a blade, clouds gathering, cloaks billowing, the howling of the wind itself. I noticed my chakra finally taking a direction different from the one it took when it flowed into the sweetened form. It freed itself on a path I was growing increasingly familiar with. I exerted that feel on the leaf between my palms, before letting it go. I opened my hands, finding that the leaf had been cut halfway through. I frowned. Why not until the end? I asked myself. Then I noticed a thin red line on my left palm and grimaced. Unbalanced. I answered my previous question. I healed myself and brought the half-cut leaf among my palms once again. Falling into myself, I reached for the pit of my stomach, visualizing a tiny ember. I went with my mind to the Tsunade desert, that we had crossed years before to carry a letter. The heavy heat of a sun that didn't know mercy. The sheer dryness of the air, the scorching heat of a fireball signing my hair during a scuffle, the reassuring warmth of a campfire. The stones turned cherry red into the fire that we dropped into a pot of water to make stew. The hunger of the 3 days no-stops run of a few weeks before when we got separated by our sensei and needed to lose pursuers. The need to grow. The rage at the sheer violence that permeated this world I ended up in. The burning sensation of muscles in the middle of training, the scorching hot feel of sensei punches grazing me. I felt the change more easily this time, my neutral chakra growing hotter and climbing up from my stomach, looking for fresh air to consume. Carefully and slowly, I controlled the output, constricting the fire so that the only direction it could grow into was my arms. It reached my palms, and the leaf sizzled. I opened my palms without letting go of the feeling, and my palms were cherry red, with the smoldering remains of the leaf on them. With a smile, I smothered the Kaden chakra. It didn't require me less effort than wind, but I had received tips from Shin, that for his pyromaniac joy was a fire-natured shinobi. I had to make do with scrolls from the library for both my water and wind-natured training. Sure, the first was my natural affinity, and for the second I had made liberal use of what Asuma had explained to Naruto in the manga. I still had to begin with Doden and Raiden, but I had time before shit started hitting the fan. I still had 3 months of patrol duty, during which I wanted to finish the second stage of elemental training for both wind and fire. Then I would go with Raiden, trying to find a way to perform elemental combination techniques on my own on the side. Daiki. A voice sounded through the woods. Hana. I correctly identified her. I dispersed my mist and flickered next to her. She threw a punch on reflex to the sudden apparition. Following my routine, I nimbly dodged and smacked her on the. She squealed in surprise before actually growling at me. Stop sneaking up on me too. She interrupted to swing a solid punch at me. I don't sneak up, I flippantly answered. And you should always cover your rear. I answered with an evil grin. Not that I was into 14 years old, but these people needed a UAL revolution. If every woman was so uptight as I saw in the manga, getting laid randomly would be very difficult. Well, there are always whores. I reassured myself. It also disturbed me greatly that almost every single man in Konoha was a pervert, at least basing myself on the manga. Then, let us put it. The life of a shinobi, or kunoichi, grants someone the perfect well, unless you're an akamichi. I corrected myself. I remembered that Jiraiya's motivation to take seriously his training had been getting all the girls. I could relate easily. Is he still flirting? Shin asked, appearing perched on a branch over our heads. And failing at it, I happily added, enjoying the scandalous blush on Hannah's face. Teens. I snorted, dodging another punch. You can play later, We need to return home. Sensei received a missive through a monkey summon. Shin quickly cut us apart. A monkey summon? That means directly from the Hokage, right? I asked. At their nods, I flickered over to the camp, quickly sealing away my possessions. That explains why a messenger managed to find us. He is a scary old man after all. Don't be disrespectful. Hana scolded me. Do you see a lot of 60 years old shinobi walking around? His age is a testament to his skill. I quickly answered. Where is Sensei? I then asked. He moved south with Ma and Ru. It will be 15 clicks by now, but we have a clean road thanks to him, so we'll catch up quickly, Hana answered. I finished gathering my things and we were blotting through the branches. You can't just call them like that because they are the Heimaru brothers. I objected. Alpha, Beta and Gamma worked wonderfully. Well, they are her ninkins. Shin butted in. He earned himself a nasty glare from me. Alpha was a good name. If only to remark that he was smarter than the other two. You do realize that technically this will be a failed mission, yes? I swiftly changed the topic. By their sudden frowns and protests, I guessed that they didn't make the connection, so I elaborated. We were supposed to go 6 months incommunicado, with Sensei to supervise, swiping through whatever shit we found. They were making us a 6 units hunt squad, and once we climbed the ranking ladder high enough we would have been asked to become Hunter Nin. That's why we wouldn't have had to pass the Chunin exams to be promoted. Shin acutely pointed out, so that we could stay off the bingo books. I nodded. It looked like these 6 months were our examination. But then why stopping us? Hana asked, rightfully confused. It can't be cheap keeping Sensei off the roosters for much longer. After all, while the bulk of the money to the Hokage Tower came by a vast number of D and C ranks, it was high-ranked shinobi and A-ranked missions that brought the advertising and the following best jobs, even the S-ranked, but those couldn't be discussed. So, Sensei is spearheading the road for us. I recapped, following the trail he knowingly left. Is this because the message made him regress to his hyper-protective behavior, or because we are needed in Konoha ASAP? Nobody answered since the answer to both questions pointed out that something happened. In the shinobi world, that usually meant bad news. And I had an idea about what exactly had happened. We had reached Gai Sensei by midday, the man was just that fast. And then we had run straight towards the village, cutting through whatever happened to be on the way. We run over the roofs of a rural little village. We severely crippled a very unlucky group of bandits which was likely made up by academy dropouts. We went ahead with food pills and I condensed water from the air into our bottles. We didn't sleep or stop to take a shit, for a whole week. Our group of 7, with Sensei opening the way, was like a battering ram through the glass that was the vast forest of Hai no Kuni. By the 4th day, my teammates started getting sloppy with their chakra control, leaving marks on the branches, or faltering here and there. The Heimaru brothers and Sensei righted them up every time. For the first 2 days and nights, I kept up my natural chakra training. Changing from neutral to water, then going back to normal. Then fire, wind. Then I sprouted a headache and I kept myself at a steady pace, letting my mind numb down, so that I was only focused on following the orange leg warmers of Gai. We proceeded in silence, for 2 reasons. 1, not wasting breath, 2, not announcing our presence to others in the area. I think we crossed a road upon which a Jonin sensei was walking with his team, escorting a caravan. Probably Gai had exchanged communication with sign language, because their sensei didn't intervene. There had been some rain on the 5th day, which managed to awaken me a little, and with a twitch of my chakra I filled to the brim our supply of water. Surprisingly or not, it looked like the just keep going state aided my Sweden. It was something to look into. On the morning of the 8th day, We stopped at the gate of the village, and while Sensei was signing in our return, I swiftly dragged medical chakra on my legs, relishing in the fresh sensation. They weren't rested, and the mental fatigue was still there, but at least running through half of High no Kuni at high speed with my weights on had still been an effective training. The Heimaru brothers were the ones that reacted better to the intensive workload. But then, they always had only to train their bodies, since their techniques were all yang-based, and Hana was the one to provide the yin component. A whole week with a silent guy sensei was a strangest thing for everyone. Nevertheless, every dream must vanish when one wakes up. My youthful students, he started, I'll race you to the Hokage's office, where we have been summoned. Ready, go. And he was off. Hana was dead on her feet, so I most gracefully circled a bit of healing chakra through her legs. While I was treating her, Shin whined, "Why do you always heal her first?" "Because she has nicer legs," I answered with a croaking voice. A week of silence will do that to anybody. Hana was so tired that she didn't even punch me, choosing to glare at me hatefully instead. I chuckled and moved over to Shin, only numbing down the pain. Then we too followed our sensei to the Hokage Tower. While on the roofs, I stole a glance at the Uchiha compound. Wooden planks over the windows, paper doors still broken. I sighed. I was a great sustainer of personal freedom, meaning that everyone was entitled to their choices. But goddammit Itachi, what's the point of doing that? We reached the lobby and nodded to the secretary, who watched us with a blank expression but nodded nonetheless, directing us to the office. It wasn't necessary to point out that his secretary was an Anbu, tasked with raising the alarm in case of an attempt of attack. I managed to contain a snort. As if anyone could wish to face the Sandame. Even with the Anbu ninjas without a doubt hidden around, the total of 5 shinobi, and 3 very big dogs, the Hokage's office managed to not look overcrowded. It was a circular room, with a tall library behind the desk where the Hokage was currently sitting, on the left of which stood an impressive pile of paperwork, and by the angry puffing of his pipe, I deduced that it was still to be completed. The door we came through had tall windows on both sides, and the left one allowed the Hokage to see the mountain with the faces of the others that had shared the job. On the walls sat pictures of the ones that had held the weight of the hat. There was even a pot of freshly picked flowers, and if I knew something about bouquet composition, I would even have known its meaning. Then I looked at the man with the hat. In the brief second that I had spent taking in the environment, he had all the time necessary to look us over. He slightly narrowed his eye when his gaze went over Shin. "Are you drunk, boy?" he asked. Shin spluttered. The question was so unexpected, and the reaction of my teammates so genuine, that I had to cough into my hand to mask a laugh. Hana's answer, however, was the best. Forgetting her fatigue, she whirled on him with a thunderous expression. Sniffing suspiciously in his direction, before looking sternly not at him, but at the Heimaru brothers, her mind busy coming up with a reason for which they had neglected to mention that fact to her. Since she probably had been able to pick up something, it was a sure thing that the Ninkins had been able to do the same. "Wait, you are drunk?" I asked. It was hilarious, but I too didn't notice anything that resembled a drunken behavior. "Unless, how come you didn't tell me?" Hana asked in the meantime at her dogs, who chorused whining of various kind, and Beta dared even attempt a friendly lick on her hand. He had always been up for authority. "No shit, he promised you food in exchange." She screamed at them. I grimaced. "Hana, do not curse in front of the Hokage." She whirled on me and just pointed her forefinger. "You shut up. You're the one who taught me to curse anyway." I wisely shut up, raising my hands in defeat. "Hey, that was for training, and don't bark up to my tree." "He's the drunk one." She was annoyed by my remark, but she turned on Shin, who was rightfully furious at me for having thrown him to the wolves. Ninkin's and an angry bitch, close enough. I remarked into the safe borders of my head. Hey, I'm not drunk, Shin objected, before deflating a bit, just a tiny bit tipsy. Maybe. But how? We've been running for a week straight. I pointed out, honestly curious, while I made my way over, my hand glowing green and checking his bloodstream. A bit tipsy, I asked sardonically, before moving to his liver. He was perfectly sane, even if it baffled me how Sensei hadn't picked it up. I've been training, he murmured, looking with a defeated demeanor at the ground. Suddenly, in my head a thought clicked. Didn't Rock Lee got drunk and kicked once? Before Hana could begin her tongue lashing anew, I cut her off, only for taijutsu. Or does it boost your Kaden too? He grinned at me, making clear that his positive answer was to my second question. But I was hardly going to let him go unscathed. Yes, I understand that since you're feeling guilty, you're treating the whole team to barbecue, and not the cheap one. I nodded sagely. He was about to protest when he noticed the increasing frown on Hannah's face and stopped. He sighed and nodded his assent. I still don't like having an alcoholic as a teammate. She protested. I'm not an alcoholic, I just happen to like to drink. Shin frowned at her, managing to look both offended by her remark and proud of his brilliant use of sake. That's the definition of alcoholism. I sighed, pinching my nose and feeling my headache returning with a vengeance. A deep belly laugh reminded us that we weren't alone. That explains also why Guy Sensei isn't singing praises around our youthful bantering. Was my first thought. Shit, we're in front of the Hokage. Was the second. You've done a good job with them, Guy-kun. The old shinobi said. Yosh. It's been the most youthful team effort Sandaime-sama. My sensei, obviously, answered. Yeah, sensei, out of 3 dogs and 3 humans only 1 human became an alcoholic. I quipped in. Hannah slapped a hand on my mouth. I frowned. It wasn't like they weren't used to my sarcasm, not only the years together as a team forced us to get to know each other. Risking your life with someone did make you closer to that person. And during the last 3 months, we had been forced to stay only with each other. Then I remembered that we had fooled around enough for our first private encounter with one of the most powerful men to have ever lived. I grimaced a bit, and at the raised eyebrow of the man, and the absolutely out of character scolding look Guy Sensei threw at me, I knew it was uncalled for. When Hannah let me, I slightly bowed. I humbly apologize. The Hokage let a second pass in silence, before rising from his chair and making his way towards me. His presence in the room thickened. It wasn't an intent, nor the foreboding feeling of a shinobi with a larger than normal chakra capacity turning his attention on you. It felt almost like being underwater, but more like when your ears get corked due to a shift in the pressure. I don't think you have a humble bone in your whole body, Daiki-kun. He commented. Looking at my teammates, I saw them trembling slightly, but neither of us could move. Why? From what I know, instead of letting other children use Eatslug as a nickname, you went as far as claiming it as your surname. He recounted, and his presence receded. Even in that heated moments, I noticed the surprised look that blossomed on my teammates' faces. I would need to explain that. Was that the thing I do to sense people around me? How the hell does he know about me? Did he have me followed? I asked myself, my old paranoid tendencies rising again. May I see your hands, Daiki-kun? He asked. I wordlessly brought my hands forward. Because when the mothering Hokage makes a polite request, it's a politely phrased absolute order. He hummed, taking my calloused hands in his marred by countless years of war. He turned them up and down, lightly trailing his finger over where I had cut myself practicing the change in chakra nature. It's been some time since I've seen hands that resemble mine. He mused. Sweden, Kaden, and even Futon. I wordlessly nodded. It was mind-blowing that he could read so much in so little. You don't use hand seals often, do you? He asked then, releasing my hands. Not often and not all the necessary ones, no. I quietly answered. The Hokage sat back into his chair and lit up his pipe with a flare of chakra fire-natured. Obviously, no hand signs. You have been recalled for a reason, he said, and his tone meant business. We straightened up and assumed a standby position, arms crossed behind our backs, feet at shoulder width and staring into the void in front of us. In a month the Chunin exams will be held in Iowa. You will go, accompanied by Kakashi Hatake, who will be an impartial judge of your performance, and upon which judgment I'll base your possible promotion. Nevertheless, the final part of your exam will be, like it always is, a tournament of some sort. Your B-ranked mission will be winning said tournament. He blew a perfect circle of smoke, that changed its shape and turned into the kanji for fire. Questions. That is a crazy strange chakra thingy. Only shape manipulation. No, he somehow laced the smoke with his chakra. I quickly analyzed it. Does it have anything to do with the closing down of the Uchiha district? Shin asked. So he noticed it too. Good. I was honestly surprised he had picked it up. The sharp gaze of the Sandaime closed on him, evaluating what to tell us. He sighed, nodding to himself. Observant too. He mumbled. 2 weeks ago, Itachi and Shisui Uchiha betrayed Konoha-ing off their clan in the process. They are currently 2S ranked missing nin. On their way out they collided with 2 genin teams ready for promotion, and they'll be incapacitated for another 6 months. He grimly explained. I blinked. Shisui. What the? That was a big change in the storyline of the Narutoverse. Survivors? Shino asked, his analytical mind coming through what was left of his alcohol-induced days. 1. Sarutobi replied, arching an eyebrow. I was so grateful that Shin was the one making questions. The other villages will learn about it soon if they hadn't already. I jumped into the fray, dragging the attention of the powerful shinobi on myself. So the Chunin exams are a show of strength. The Sandaime gazed bored into me for an instant, before turning to Guy once more. You've done a really good job with them. While our sensei was preening youthfully under the praise, Hannah cleared her throat. Why call us back a whole month before the exams? We could have keep up the mission and went straight to Iowa from the border. Because I wanted you to know what was at stake, our reputation, and every message can be intercepted. And because in the village, with a month of preparation, I wanted you to learn something flashy, suited to properly impress our future customers. I stifled groan. I didn't do flashy. Like hell I was going to use the Rasengan, and while I could use with some measure of safety the first 5 gates if only for a brief period, they left me battered. That was another reason why I didn't like the Chunin exams. This whole advertisement part was just stupid. Yeah, I got it. Shinobi in this world were more like foot soldiers, highly reliant on stealth, so it wasn't unreasonable that there were situations that required large-scale destruction. Still, I disliked it. Why throwing a giant fireball when overheating the brain of the target did the same job with a fraction of the effort? Besides, it was less clean. I shuddered. How far have I come? To consider how much more elegant icing someone with the least amount of force necessary. But I recognized an opportunity when I saw one. I've been working on my original elemental jutsu. The theory is sound, and it's uncharacteristically flashy, for me. I've hit a snag with the testing, however, since until I properly learn it the middle results will be highly unstable and could either rupture my chakra coils, completely dry me of chakra, make my blood vessels explode, or simply go booming everything in 3 meters radius. Is there some kind of, I don't know, seal maybe? That can help. Or a way to drastically increase my chakra reserves different from the long road of constant exercise. Or at least a way to infuse my sweetened Bunshins with roughly half of my chakra. It's very demanding and I can't make my clones strong enough to perform it. And as an afterthought, I remembered exactly who I was trying to play, and added a hasty, Hokage-sama. Right after we met with the Hokage, we left the office and scattered. Shin wanted to get a head start on possible ventures in Iowa his family could get a profit out of. Hana and the Heimaru brothers simply missed the kennels, and Sensei was going to search for a friendly spar. Whoever accepted was in for a lot of pain, no doubt. With a side dish of helpful suggestions that managed to sound extremely patronizing without Guy meaning it one bit. Those were the reasons everyone gave. What I know for sure my teammates did, was find a bed and sleep for 12 hours straight. How do I know? Because I found myself the nearest park, recovered my sleeping bag and unrolled it on the grass. I slept in the sunshine, over my sleeping bag, with my arms crossed behind my head. I probably was the image of relaxing, when I simply shut down, unable to stay awake a moment longer, and feeling the strain of the travel. I had weathered it better than my teammates, but only because Shin was drunk, meaning that he probably had been struggling to keep his chakra flowing evenly from day one. And we simply put more time in our physical conditioning than Hana, who had to spend a lot of time in learning all the nuances to become a vet, not only a med nin. And she insisted to become proficient in Doden ninjutsu too. Along with that, the Inuzuka learned her family techniques, and working with her ninkins, took the bulk of the scouting job. So she always had a lot on her plate. Even if she managed to somewhat keep up with the trick we discovered with muscle regeneration. None in my team was a pushover. It made me think about how I could enhance my body in other ways. More limbs were out of the equation, they would mess up my balance and I would need to create a taijutsu style from scratch. But Orochimaru was proof that one could do a lot of things to his own body. Even Konan from Akatsuki, the woman was able to become a cloud of slips of paper, for God's sake. But maybe I's better equipped to see in the pitch darkness. Even if a tail would be cool in some way, mostly because it would freak out everyone. I awoke in the middle of the afternoon, feeling stiff for the weight of the travel. I stretched myself and sealed my stuff away once more. I reached a cheap hotel and checked in for the following week. It wasn't like I was going to leave any of my stuff around. I liked having all of my belongings on me, but a bathroom was nothing to scoff at. Not after the week I had passed. I took a hard look at my clothes, which smelled by the way, and while they were not in tatters, I hadn't done them any favors during my training. I sighed. Shopping it is. My most prized possession, and the only one that I couldn't replace, were the weights that Guy Sensei had gifted us. They were inscribed with seals, exactly like the ones Lee's would one day wear. I had 2 sets that circled my legs, and I moved them one day under the knee, one day above. 2 smaller sets on my forearms, and a plaque that I brought on my back. It was a narrow thing that fitted in the upper half of my back, allowing me almost complete freedom of movement. The following morning I had started a set of exercises at 4 a.m. sharp, already in the training ground 11. It wouldn't do to be late after all. If there was something that my team did not lack, it was endurance and the ability to quickly recover. Training ground 11 had an abundance of water. From a waterfall that rumbled on a rocky cliff, a river broke into small streams that resolved themselves into ponds, puddles, and even a marsh, with its distinctive reeds and sedges. The rest of the wet terrain was instead an actual swamp, with tall trees hiding the sky from view. It can't be said that the higher-ups don't wish their ninjas to be anything but ready to fight everywhere. I dryly noted. I sat down on a pond in what I esteemed was the rough center of the training ground. The delicate control I was exercising on my chakra made the surface of the water as solid as stone. I started breathing slowly, the water rippling from time to time when my concentration faded. At first I simply thought about what I was hopefully going to learn. Once I had the single Kage Bunshin down, if my chakra could handle it, I would try to figure out the multiple Kage Bunshin part. But that wasn't really what I needed right away. I knew that I had a normal-sized chakra pool, so I wouldn't be spamming more than a single clone anytime soon. What I knew from the manga was that every clone you created started with the half chakra of the original. There was however a minimal requirement to create a Kage Bunshin, and that meant that one needed to have at least double that requirement in his chakra pool. Sure, I could for a brief time open the gates to use more chakra than normal, but I didn't know what kind of effect it would have. After all, the Bunshin was made of pure chakra, so it didn't have 8 gates. It had to have chakra coils since otherwise, it wouldn't have been able to perform jutsus, but opening and closing the gates was not something one could do like a jutsu. It was more like knowing to move only a single muscle on the side of the nose. I knew that the Kage Bunshin was far less complex than what such a scary jutsu deserved to be, since, well, Naruto was an idiot. If he could figure it out at 12 from a scroll, I would bloody be able to do the same. After what the position of the sun told me had been 4 hours, I was still alone. However, I had seen far too many movies of cranky mysterious masters of their art that assigned strange tasks to their students. Being left to wait was far from the worst that could have happened. Besides, it was unlikely that the Sandaime himself would come. He probably had ordered some of the lower-ranked shinobi to come and give me a hand. However, I truly hoped that I was going to be taught the Kage Bunshin. It was substantially different from the mental-based. It probably carried within itself a far more heavy yin component. Maybe the ratio would even be closer to 50%. But I wanted to try my Suiten, Rasengan. So whichever method they offered me to try it out without dying would be more than welcome. Rooting myself at the moment, I let go of my future considerations and placed a hand on the surface of the water, pouring a silver of my chakra in the liquid. I lifted my hand slightly, my fingertips still connected to the water below. Tiny droplets of water rose in the air, floating aimlessly at the height of my shoulder. I could feel each one of them. Because of that wisp of chakra in each of them, they were not simply connected to me, but my chakra was the droplets. Following a gut instinct, I had them circle me, thinning and joining one with another. They formed a thread, invisible if not for a light sheen, less thick than ninja wire, and far more useful than it. It spun in a circle around me, and it kept expanding, taking the necessary water from the damp environment. It soon reached a 30 meters radius. The feel of it was a cross between trailing my fingers over the surfaces it met and what I imagined would a sonar feel if I had one in my head. I let myself fall into the lull I found myself in during the travel from the border to Konoha. It had a marvelous effect. My attention was equally shared among regulating my breathing, the feedback from my line of water, the control I had to exercise to keep myself sitting on the pond, and the slow flowing of the chakra in my gut. I wasn't doing anything with it, it simply was twirling around my body with a steady rhythm. It was running through my veins along with my blood, and my body was in a perfectly balanced enhanced state. Usually, when someone uses chakra to strengthen oneself, it tends to pool unevenly in the limbs, snapping like a coil upon impact. Sure, the joints are always equally reinforced. It was stupid to throw a chakra-enhanced punch only to dislocate your knees. Every hit made leverage somewhere after all. I froze, going over my last thoughts with a confused frown marring my features. I had thought something that could be, my chakra flowed with my blood. Sweden user always had one difficulty above all. Taking water out of thin air required either vast amounts of chakra or an outstanding control. I had some of the latter, but why put myself through such a struggle? The human body was 60% water. A male adult had roughly 5 liters of blood running through his veins. A liter could be shed without risking death. And that was for civilians, a ninja, with enhanced regenerative abilities, without even talking about how I could use medical chakra to increase the blood production, would last much longer. Hell, even a blood pill. It was a disgusting, but fascinating new perspective. Under this point of view, once white an enemy, I could find a way to extract water from his body. It couldn't be done before the death since their chakra would naturally oppose mine. Unless I synced myself with them like I do when I heal someone else. I thoughtfully considered. I wonder if this is how Orochimaru got started. I distractedly commented. I lacked his natural sadism and obsession with red eyes, but the ability to think truly horrific things were there. I opened my eyes and abruptly raised my other arm upwards, skillfully rising a thick mist around myself. It didn't reach the border of my line of water, but it hid me from view. I rose from my seated position, thoughtlessly circulating my chakra to dispel the stiffness. From the tip of my fingers rose a chakra scalpel, faintly glowing blue. Another strange thing is the blue coloration of chakra. I thought, noticing the difference in comparison with the medical one, which glowed of faint green light. I nicked my other arm and dispelled the scalpel. I let the blood drip into my cupped hand. Looking at the cut, I prodded around the area with my chakra, and finding the nearest tenketsu, I poured out a delicate flare of medical chakra. With deep satisfaction, I looked at my wound closing. Even if the feeling was unsettling, the skin is not meant to knit itself together that fast. I focused on the blood in my cupped hand and poked it with my chakra. It didn't react, simply starting the clotting process faster. There is still my chakra in the blood, and gifting more energy to it only makes it work faster. Even if its strength was quickly dimming. I couldn't manipulate my blood, but I only needed to extract the water in it. How could I? Even the single drop I could raise from a puddle was ready-made of water. After a few minutes, I found my answer. After all, I already knew how to separate a toxin from the bloodstream. Now I only needed to tweak it so that it could suit me. Slowly I started to make my chakra spin the blood clockwise, while calling for the water to move in the opposite direction. After the training I underwent to learn the Rasengan, it was easier than it might sound. Soon after, I held a spinning circle of darkish red, something, and above it, one of crystal clear water. The quantity was negligible, however, it was something that I could use in emergencies. I had a stony determination that made me push forward. Distasteful, I commented. I dropped the dirty hand into the pond, keeping up the water distilled from my blood. It didn't feel any different than normal. Thoughtfully, I let it fall. I popped out a food pill and ingested it thoughtfully. It was late, almost midday. A ripple in my line of water warned me that something was approaching. Maybe I could layer 2 lines so that I could estimate the speed of the trespasser. I noted. Yo. He greeted me. 67, 5 kilograms, 0.181 centimeters. Masked. Leaf band. Identified as Kakashi. I quickly thought, the training stopping me from jumping in surprise. I smiled. Yo. To you too. I flippantly answered. Good news. The Hokage didn't order my death. Bad news. I've clearly been too heavy-handed in prodding him towards the cage Bunshin, and Kakashi is here to question me discreetly. I reasoned. And probably execute me if I am deemed a threat. I wasn't strong enough to survive an attempt on my life made by any elite jonin, I knew that. I'm guessing Hokage-sama sent you? I asked, forcing myself to remember the honorific. The scarecrow with gravity-defying silver hair I smiled at me and stood silent. This is going to get old pretty fast. I choose to go without displaying my growing fear of being about to bead. Fear is the mind killer. I reminded myself. I need a way to perform a highly unstable Suiten Jutsu, which is likely to backfire the first times. I should get the hang of it pretty quickly. Still, silently, the copy ninja brought his hands together in a strange cross-shaped seal. It was probably unique to this technique. I had read about modifying hand seals, but it was very far from my area of expertise. I copied it, and pushed just a little bit of chakra into it, feeling like I was trying to break through a thick stone wall of some kind. I let go. I wasn't eager to burst my chakra coils due to a misused hand seal after all. I brought all my attention to Kakashi, pouring all of my sensing ability on him. He was kind enough to wait to form me before actually performing the technique. I couldn't get a read of him. While even Guy-sensei was somewhat hidden from my reads, I still used to get some kind of feedback. One that spoke of an unrelenting hunter. With Kakashi, I got nothing. I knew he was there, sure, but I got the feeling that I was seeing only what he wanted me to. In this case, only how he was molding his chakra. He pressured was what I started doing. Then he pushed it so that it would stand taller than the thick stone wall that I felt before, then he started folding it over the edge. The part grinding on the top of the wall got thinner and thinner, while the mass of chakra on the outer side of the wall took shape. When there was only a strand left connecting the two chakras, with a tiny wisp of smoke, appeared a Bunshin of Kakashi, already eyes smiling at me. This is the Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. The original one said, but he already knew that. The copy added, looking at the first scarecrow ninja. They both turned on me, and if it wasn't for the subtling intent I would have laughed for the resemblance with the Weasley twins. Time to start bullshitting my way through this mess. I shrugged. I heard of it years ago. I'm an infiltration specialist. Ninjas that can't hold their alcohol shouldn't drink. The shinobi tilted his head, dispelling his clone. And why shouldn't you be put under arrest for stealing village secrets? I blinked. Because he wasn't drunk. I thought it was a test or a way to train me how to find out information without raising suspects. The single eye on the face of the older shinobi narrowed. When? Names. Where? He succinctly ordered me to provide. The day Guy-sensei told me I was going to be a Team 10 specialist in thieving and subterfuge. I tried my hand at subterfuge since I was forbidden from stealing from civilians and not so stupid as to try stealing from a shinobi. His voice was cold when he answered. Elaborate, Genin. I entered a pub in the middle of the night and chatted with a fake drunk about bushings. He started the conversation. His pupils didn't react to the changes of light as slowly as they should have with the amount of sake in his breath. I quickly explained. And you didn't report this to your superior in command, namely Might Guy, why? He asked. I already told you. I thought it was some kind of test, and since I never met the guy again, I had assumed I failed. I answered. And how did you manage to enter a pub? He asked, still suspicious. I grinned. Time to sell my bullshit. I brought my right hand forward and performed a half-ram seal. I carefully molded my chakra into the necessary way to create a bunshin and stored it away in a tenketsu along my spine, before dedicating myself to the henge. When it was ready, I folded it into a tenketsu in the lower half of my back. Finally, I shaped my chakra into a rough camouflage technique. When I was ready, I wrapped myself in the third technique, and I unleashed the first technique, merging it with the second. Only I didn't want a bunshin, so I simply overlapped the new, hanged bunshin to my body, carefully making sure that my expression would be matched by the face that stood 20 centimeters above me, and that I kept my actual arms folded so that my hands stood in the same position of the imaginary ones. And I snapped my fingers. Kakashi's lone eye widened. Why? Because a standard Bunshin does cast a shadow, but its movements are limited to be the exact copy of the original one. Which is why it's easy to distinguish one from the original. The eyes of the original are the only ones actually in line with the target. And the Bunshin steps do not make a sound when they hit the ground. A henge on the other way overlaps a different image on your own body, and if the user was skillful enough, it could even be used to change his voice. However, the sound originated from the real body, the one hidden underneath the henge, so it was easy enough to spot a henge if one was observant enough. And shinobi, the ones that liked to stay alive, tended to be of the observant kind. I am a subterfuge specialist. Infiltration is a good skill to have. The words left my mouth, that moved in perfect sync with the henge, but from an external point of view, our hearing as it is the case, the point of origin of the sound should have been lower. I walked a slow circle around Kakashi. The adult I was impersonating was the one who rented me my room the day before, so it was fresh in my memory. I let the older shinobi observe my work for a while longer, making sure that the light flapping of my actual clothes left my not real ones from the opportune places, and careful in placing my feet down heel first, since their point was a tiny bit longer than my actual ones. And you have been able to do this since your first day as a genin? The scarecrow ninja asked me. I could tell that he was suitably impressed. Oh, no, at the time I still needed hand seals. I cheekily answered. Do you have any other secrets? He asked, tilting his head. I dispelled my technique, loads. And before he could I hastily added, but none that harms Konoha. I just prefer my skills to be shown on a need-to-know basis. His presence then pressed on me, his posture hadn't changed, his eye was half-lidded, and there wasn't any intent in the air. If not for my eyes seeing him, I would have thought to be alone, only underwater. I stilled the flow of my chakra, before letting it explode out of my tenketsu in an attempt to destroy the genjutsu. I succeeded. The air turned back to normal, and Kakashi's eyes smiled at me. Maybe I'll not beat after all. I believe you, he told me, when you say that you do not wish harm to Konoha. Shit. We only need to check with the Yamanaka for the rest of your story. He added. No. I refuse. No. I won't allow anyone to make a mess in my head. Kakashi blinked, visibly surprised by my strong reaction. I disliking. But I do it for the village. I dislike having to fight. But I do it for the village. I like being alive. But I put it at risk for the village. My life belongs to the Hokage. I accept it. I'll follow his orders, but my thoughts are mine. I hissed the last part. I love Guy-sensei and my teammates, I would never harm Konoha. You are a strange kid. He sighed. It would only be two. If I feel someone in my head all myself. I cut him. Cutting off an official your superior was stupid under every single aspect, but I needed to stress it. I am my mind. If someone but me is in it, I'd rather die. How would I know after that if my thoughts are still mine? If I am still me. And I am sincerely scared about it. I know it's possible since Shishui has the Koto Amatsukami. I wonder if Danzo has one of his eyes or not. Kakashi looked at me strangely. Then shrugged, as to say that he heard worst fears, and dug out his trademark orange-covered book. So all my very cool and reasonable lies were just useless. How the do shinobi lie to each other? My heartbeat was steady, my voice didn't falter. So I am not going to be arrested. Just because you say that I am not a threat. I asked after a while. I was expecting more intimidation. There has never been a single account of you going against orders, or do anything to damage Konoha. Your sensei words hold weight. As he is an extraordinary judge of character. He answered without raising his gaze from his book. Taking it as the suggestion it was, I promised myself that I would find my sensei to take him. That evening, While the sun was setting, I spotted my sensei on the top of the Shodai's stone head. Since it was unusual for him, I already knew that he was waiting for me. I landed near him. Sensei, I spoke quietly. Daiki-kun. He quietly greeted me, and that, more than anything, made clear that he was mad. No youthfulness in the air tonight. I bowed at the waist and said, I'm sorry, Sensei. It was the truth. Team 10 was the only people I cared about in that world, even if I would always remember Chihiro's lessons and Itachi's stories with fondness. I hadn't thought about what to say to him, more busy trying to learn the Kage Bunshin under the teachings of Kakashi. Which had been, don't keep a clone for more than 30 minutes, or 3 clones for more than 10 minutes. It turns out that the brain isn't equipped to deal with more information than the ones he naturally receives. So overdoing it would turn my brain into mush. Not that I was able to summon more than 2 clones at the same time, their chakra cost was prohibitive. The good part was that once a clone dispelled, along with its memories came back all the chakra that he had still left, so I had been able to try the technique several times. The bad part was that the copy ninja was a lousy teacher. His first demonstration of the jutsu had also been the last. No explanation whatsoever. Son of a bitch. After a couple of minutes of random thoughts on my part, that I spent bowed, Guy sighed. Clouds come from time to time, and bring to men a chance to rest. From looking at the moon. I kept bowing, and since my face was hidden, I didn't bother to hide my surprised expression. That was some kind of haiku, wasn't it? After a couple of minutes, he uncharacteristically sighed another time. As shinobi, we often deal with secrets, Daiki-kun. Secrets we steal, ones we craft to trick the enemy, secrets we build to protect ourselves, others that we cling to. Like my love for poetry, for example. I saw his feet turn in my direction. Some secrets do not exist for the benefit of anyone but our sanity, and often have no logical reason to be secrets at all. When the risk to be exposed, it's not uncommon to react stupidly. I flinched. Not because I hated being called stupid, but because it was Guy Sensei who was scolding, berating me. I wasn't used to it. Stupidity, however, is something only experience can help with. He went on, trying to manipulate your own cage, for no other reason than feeling proud of your skill to do so is utter foolishness. His deep voice almost growled the last word. If you weren't my student, you would have made yourself a dangerous enemy where you could have found an ally. Only because you are proud of your secrets. Shinobis know the value of secrets. Sandaime-sama knows more about being a shinobi than anyone else alive, and instead of asking for guidance, you try to lead him by the nose. How dare you? He grabbed my shoulder and righted me. He looked me in the eyes for what I could tell was a long time. His hand wasn't exactly giving me an option either. For the third time that evening, he sighed. In many ways, you are a wonderful student. Do you remember what you told us when Shin joked about your feeling unwell after every encounter during which you have taken a life? I shook my head. Whatever I said to him after a situation during which I hated was foggy at best. We can't do anything about it. I tried to make her drop the topic. They can't just make me compete without my ninkins. She hissed. They do have a point though, Shin added. It wouldn't be exactly fair if we were a team of 6 members, would it? We could have split, I argued. 2 teams, Hana with Beta and Gamma, Shin, Alpha, and I. Or even 3 pairs, each of us with one of the Heimaru brothers. See, Hana answered. There was another solution. This exam it's rigged, I tell ya. And Shin answered, defending the understandable position of Iwa. I sighed, tuning them out and taking in the sights. Iwa was very different from Konoha, obviously, but it wasn't something I had thought I would ever get to see. Leaf and Rock Nins had a turbulent relationship. Meaning that if either hidden village could afford it, they would still be at war. More than one reason explained this, but mainly, the fourth Hokage made sure that whichever emotion any Iowa nin could ever display toward a leaf nin would range only from disgust to deep-seated hatred. I had no doubt that Iowa threw a party that lasted at least a month after they heard of the Kyuubi attack. Even knowing all of that, there was no way I could deny Iowa had its kind of beauty. It was built on a mountain, and if not for the simple design and reddish stone, which explained the color of their uniforms, it could even remind me of Minas Tirith. There was no mistaking the Tsuchikage's tower toppling at all. The real strange thing, however, was that the only mountains I spotted in their land were around Iwagakure no Sato itself. The rest of the land was mostly barren, with many canyons or plateaus breaking the otherwise boring flat surface of the horizon. That made me think that the mountains, which did not hide the hidden village, were either a red herring or a random line of defense. If I were the Tsuchikage, I would have placed my village hidden deep underground, or at least in a disguised canyon. But the fact that the mountains weren't following a line, thus pointing out that they weren't originated from the collision of two tectonic plates, kept nagging at the back of my mind. Then I remembered that at least 3 mountains were volcanoes. Someone went all out with Doden, it seems. To me, it looked like the founders of Iowa found a way to rise volcanoes in the middle of nowhere, and then used the lava to shape the rest of the mountains. Iowa is the bait in the center of a gigantic trap. I blinked, looking around with big eyes. Guys, I called. And when my teammates turned towards me, I shared my findings, making them whistle. Kakashi, who was walking ahead of us, turned his head and briefly, I smiled at me, before returning to give to his smut the attention it deserved. The Chunins escorting us through the maze that were the streets of the city glared at me. Touchy touchy. Hana's right hand started darting through gestures almost faster than I could follow. Why Konoha not trap? Shin took upon himself to answer, lowering the jug of sake from which he had been sipping, he gestured. When built Hashirama and Madara? He looked at our female teammate in a way that managed to convey how stupid it was to attack either of them, so that Konohagakure no Sato didn't exactly need to stay hidden. I butted in. Trees hide armies and traps. Among trunks, beneath roots, above branches. Hana nodded thoughtfully, satisfied by the answer. So, are we not talking about why we are here without Gai-sensei? She asked. Daiki messed up. Shin drawled. That's not true. I protested. Well, I did, but we were going to go with Kakashi before I messed up. I then corrected my previous statement. After a while Hana went back into the fray. And why are you living in a tent in the Uchiha district? I rolled my eyes. Because of reasons. She pouted. Until someone finds out and calls him on it, it's fine, Hana-chan. Shin graciously defended me. Sensei knows. I quipped in. And while Shin rolled his eyes, expressing perfectly the duh he wanted to say, Hana was surprised. And he didn't tell you to leave? She asked, frowning heavily. I got it, living on a land nobody uses only because the ones who did die less than 2 months before was disrespectful towards the dead. But I was willing to bet that Sasuke's mother wouldn't have wanted her 8-year-old son to live alone in what was a cemetery. And it was convenient being able to not pay rent. As a genin after all, I couldn't take up solo missions. It's strange, the tongue-lashing Gai-sensei gave me made me think a lot. I was not a child to be scolded, but after my firsts, sensei had been the one to put me back together. He had been the one who taught me. Sure, he did it because of orders and because he was part of the giant war machine that the elemental nations were. But it was also the only thing he had ever known. So with that prospect in mind, he went beyond his duty, to make sure I was sane, both in mind and body. I was still unsure about what exactly had hit me about his speech. I got, and tried to manipulate my cage. I recalled. It was likely one of the big no-no things of this world. My cage. I scoffed at the words. Since when I belonged to Konoha. My friendships tied me to Shin, Hana and Guy. I felt a tiny bit of pity for Sasuke, along with a narrow twinge of guilt. But that was it. It seemed foolish to pretend that I cared about the prestige of my home country. Most of my last plea to Kakashi had been true, wide, hurt and risked myself for the village. I knew that my life was in the hands of those able to issue orders to me. And while it was true that I choose it of my own free will, it didn't change that my reason was becoming strong enough to be able to protect myself. The thought of trying to find a way to go back to my world of origin never occurred to me. I hadn't much to go back to. A world with chakra in it was far more interesting, and I enjoyed mastering new skills or honing the ones I already had. And from the end of the manga, I knew there were ways to travel to different dimensions. Which in itself was mind-blowing. Fuinjutsu was probably the only way through which I could accomplish it. However, its inner workings were restricted to Jonins. Sure, I could memorize a seal and replicate it, even the technique to burn a seal onto something wasn't hard to pick up. I had memorized storage and explosive seals. There weren't others I could access. I did study the differences among the storage scrolls one managed to get my hands upon. There weren't many, and since seals were handwritten, I couldn't be sure the different squiggles weren't a quirk of the maker. Even if I did find a storage seal that worked for water, that meant that I walked around with a lake on my shoulders. Being able to extract water from the air was something I wouldn't do out of training or necessity. I sighed. I didn't have a purpose, but becoming strong was something that could keep me busy. So I wasn't desperate for a soul-shattering, mind-blowing revelation that would give me a main quest. Doing my own thing sounded pretty good, even if I had to find a way to stop Obito from resurrecting Madara. That was a big bad threat looming at the horizon. Oi, oi, Hana snapped her fingers in front of my face. Are you even there? I looked at her, honestly not knowing what she wanted. What? She asked you why sensei hadn't you leave the Uchiha compound. Shin came in my rescue. Oh, I forgot she was questioning me. Because I explained my reasons. Which are? Hana asked. The ones I'm not telling you. I flippantly concluded, worsening her pout. She is so different from the other Inuzuka. Ma, children, we're here. Kakashi stopped Hana from going on a rampage. We entered in a great hall where a lot of other genin teams were already waiting. I narrowed my eyes. Hitaki-san, I swear that if we are late because. And now that Konoha nins had deemed us worthy of their presence. A jonin in an Iowa uniform interrupted me, and I noticed that Kakashi had vanished from where he had been standing. Son of a bitch. I repeated in my head. We can begin. The Iowa jonin went ahead. The exam will be threefold. The first stage is about to begin. One member from every team will come here and pick a random number. He waited for a second. Now, I exchanged a look with my teammates, and seeing that they were acting shy all of a sudden, I rolled my eyes and went ahead. There are a lot of teams. I noticed again. I didn't exactly remember how many people attended, or will attend. I corrected myself in the safety of my mind, the Chunin exams in Konoha, but I knew that everyone could be squeezed into a classroom, even if a big one. That was not the case. I placed my hand into an urn and extracted a white rubber ball. The number 7 gleaming in black over it. Wasn't it a lucky number? When every team had a number, the proctor went ahead. There were 2 balls for each number. The one who picked up the number will be given a secret and become a prisoner. The other 2 members of his team will have to obtain said secret from the other genin who picked the same number. The secret is necessary to rescue your companion, while the one questioned will have to keep it secret. To pass the first stage, a team must not only not divulge the secret, but also obtain it. Questions. A kunoichi from Suna raised her hand. She, like me, belonged to the group that extracted the numbers. What are the two doing the questioning allowed to do? The proctor didn't miss a beat. What are you willing to do for your village? Many of us gulped, and for a second, I was worried. Then I thought about what I knew about the first stage of the exam. In the manga, it had been a giant trick. So I just have to free myself. I started to plan. So we are allowed to the prisoner. An Iowa shinobi from the bigger group asked, looking at me with a hungry gleam in his eyes. Ing Iowa. Then I exchanged a look with Hana and Shin. What would I be willing to do for my village? I was relieved to be the one questioned. I sure as hell wasn't going to torture any of the hopeful chunins around me. I looked around, taking in the general age of the genins. There were some younger and some older than me. On the older side there was a kunoichi from Kumo with sharp features that reminded me of someone, probably a filler character. So how do I free myself? I started plotting possible solutions. They separated us and an Iowa chunin led me to my prison cell. It was a square cube carved out from the rock. It was lit by a torch behind the single wooden chair. Sit, he ordered me. Then he tied me, without being too rough, to the chair. Hands far from each other behind the backrest, my hips and legs tightly immobilized too. The other two will come in a minute after I leave the room. Your secret is, Don. He tonelessly said. I guess the Tsuchikage picked the more level-headed to deal with Konoha. It's almost kind of him. Then my eyes narrowed. He didn't say in a minute, he said a minute after I've left. Exactly 1 minute. Why not? We'll be here shortly. I nodded thankfully to the Iowa chunin, who had seen fit gagging me too. It's not like I can bite through the ninja wire. I blinked. Well, Hana could. Sensible precaution. I had a minute to organize the counter trap. Firstly, I examined my gag. Well, shit. It wasn't a gag, it was a slip of paper, and since I couldn't feel my chakra, I deduced that not only it kept my mouth shut, but was also a chakra inhibitor. It wasn't that it stopped the flow of chakra, it simply made me unaware of it, and thusly unable to manipulate it. Jutsus had two components, the chakra, the control, which was a mesh between your understanding of what you were trying to accomplish and how finely you could tune the movement of your chakra. Hand seals worked a bit in the middle of the two. The more you had of one, the less you needed the other, but hand seals stabilized greatly the more lengthy processes that manipulated chakra. My chakra control was sublime, if not on par with Tsunade Perfect 1. I had enough chakra to perform the Kage Bunshin, and I trained extensively with it. Only, I had never done it without hand seals before, and based on my experience, I would need several weeks of work to learn how to do it. I had an easier time with Sweden, but there were no tricks with Kinjutsu. So, preparing myself to take a beating passively, or whichever torture kids were capable of. Then I thought about Itachi. Better not play it with. I can endure it. I forced myself to realize that kids in this world were closer to mindless soldiers than anything else. At least some veterans had seen enough shit to start questioning themselves. I had roughly another 30 seconds to come up with something. And not being able to access my chakra was quickly sending me towards mindless fear. In all the shit I've been put through, I always had with me the comforting presence of my chakra. It came with the knowledge that, if needed, I could try something. I bit my tongue in frustration, feeling the spike of pain and the metallic taste of blood. In my haste, I bit too deep and now there was a lot of blood in my mouth. Disgusting. But it managed to calm me down. Somewhat. I slowed down my breathing, hoping that I would be able to spit out the blood soon. I didn't want to swallow it, it would make me puke. And with the seal on my mouth I would have to swallow it. Stop thinking about it. I mentally screamed at myself. I forcibly changed the direction of my thoughts. They can't me if they want to pass. But they could cripple me. Bloody hell, I would cripple an enemy. Then I paused, running through the stuff I was able to do. Well, there are always the gates. They simply change the amount of chakra that can flow through my body. The third is probably enough to shred the seal. With that backup plan, I finally managed to relax. I had a way out. Mind games first, then. I decided when a kunoichi and a shinobi entered the room. Kiri kunoichi. 13. 160 centimeters. 48 kilogram. No distinctive signs. Pale blonde, dark brown eyes. Likely support role. Kiri shinobi. 15. 175 centimeters. 70 kilogram. A scar across the nose. Slight discoloration of the left iris, possible trauma. Brown hair, brown eyes. No taijutsu or kenjutsu user. Ninjutsu or genjutsu. They slammed the door behind themselves. Seriously. This should be intimidating. Then I remembered that to become genin in Kiri they had to a classmate and my hopes to bullshit my way through the situation I was in dimmed. Then he punched me on the cheek. My head slammed on the side, and my vision went out of focus. When they explained the task I couldn't believe our luck. He started conversationally the girl, who with an uncaring twitch of the wrist unleashed a kunai that slashed open my other cheek. You see, my father is in the torture and interrogation department. She went on. So I shared what I knew, but Hano, here, is a natural. And while we both enjoy this kind of game, we really need to be quick. So, we are going to ask only once, and you are going to tell us. The or else torture will start for real, went unsaid. The shinobi, Hano, my mind provided, grabbed the edge of the seal and ripped it off. Immediately, I felt again my chakra running through my coils and started molding it in my mouth. I looked at them, managing to plaster a bored expression on my face. The talking won't work, I decided. So, the girl asked, what's the secret? The shinobi walked forward cracking his knuckles, with a creepy grin on his face. He really would have preferred if I refused to tell them. At least for a while, I could tell from the way his pupils were widening at the prospect of beating down a tied-up prisoner. I raised an eyebrow and kept discreetly molding my chakra. It was something done with so little waste that even a censor would have needed to check twice to be sure I was doing something. I tensed my muscles, but even then the punch that landed on my stomach made me wheeze through my nose. I couldn't open my mouth until I was ready. 2 minutes had passed. I wanted to keep the gates a secret, but I was going to reach the end of my rope pretty soon. Hano hit me again, and 4 minutes after they had entered I still had to open my mouth once. Only, they thought it was because I chose the indestructible approach. I was ready. I slowly nodded and grumbled something in my throat. Did you broke his jaw? The girl asked her companion, who shrugged unapologetically. I distractedly wondered if he was some kind of idiot with a sadist streak a mile wide. And there was no way around it. I wanted him dead. I inhaled deeply through the nose and acted. I'll feel sad later. The Sweden Tepidama at its simplest allows the user to spit a ball of water of different dimensions, based on the quantity of chakra you poured in it, at high speed. The whole point of it was that said ball of water hit like a ton of bricks. That was not what I did. When I saw an opening I spat a thin, high-pressure jet of bloodied water since I was manipulating the water in my blood. The thin, reddish line sawed through Hano, following the direction in which I was moving my head. The kunoichi reacted fast enough to be merely clipped by it, but she did something with her chakra that turned the cutting edge of my attack into a blunt force. She was thrown against the wall, hit her head, and slumped forward, unconscious. In the same way, I could feel the drops of water I had laced with my chakra a month before. I felt my jet of bloodied water shredding through cloth, chainmail, skin, muscle and bone, digging into the rock of the room, before slamming against the kunoichi. I blinked. Well, that was kind of underwhelming, I murmured, before directing medical chakra through the tenketsu on my palate, carefully healing my tongue. I let my mind take a step back from the gore in front of me and closed my eyes, choosing to focus on something else. I had tried to separate the water from the rest of the blood. But controlling such manipulation with the limited number of tenketsus in my mouth was another kettle of fish. The real question was why the blood in my mouth didn't start clotting when I fed it chakra. The only different thing was from my other experiments with blood had been performing them in my hands. So maybe the presence of air induced in the blood a different way to react when fed chakra. I am an idiot. I didn't need to separate the water from the blood. I couldn't infuse chakra into my blood before turning it into water-natured one, since the blood would immediately try to clot, since it was outside of my veins. That was how I manipulated water without hand seals. But blood already was laced with my chakra. I simply needed to change it into water-natured one. And that had been what I did in my haste. I should thank Hano in the next life. I grimaced. He was a sadistic bastard, but it was around my age, and was truly his fault. Can I fault him for adapting to the only kind of life this world teaches? I asked myself. The answer was no. And even if I could argue that removing sadists in the position of letting loose with their instinct was more or less like removing cancer, it didn't change the fact that why'd another kid? I gathered my chakra very carefully at the tips of my right hand, calling forth a chakra scalpel. As slowly as I could, I closed my hand, bringing the scalpel over the ninja wire. It was something that I had chosen not to do before because cutting too deep could have meant wounding myself. More specifically, cutting my veins and tendons. Which was something that required hours to heal. And hurts like a bitch, thank you very much. After having freed my right hand, the rest was easy. I rose from my seat, rolling my shoulders and doing my best to ignore both the view I could see his spine, and the smell of the shinobi that I had butchered. Blood and shit. Death smells like blood and shit. I left the room not caring a bit about the strange looks I got from the chunin who was patrolling that section of the corridor. We had to stay still for a whole hour in a waiting room, all the other teams slowly trickling in. How many? Hannah asked. 25 teams. Shin drawled. I could smell the sake in his breath from where I stood. And that reminds me. I still can't believe your solution had been getting your prisoner drunk, I said. They had the decency to at least look sheepish, even if it was Hannah who, almost uncharacteristically, rolled her eyes and dismissed my whining. We only took 10 minutes, you're a tough guy, we knew you could handle it. She said, still sore because I haven't told her why I set up a tent in the Uchiha district. I wondered. Jennings. The proctor called our attention, and the somewhat relaxed environment turned into a more tense one. All of us were staring at him, waiting for instructions. One genin from each team will come to this stand and be given a wooden chip. He rose one in the air so that everyone could see it. On it, there is etched either the Saru, Tatsu, or Tora hand sign. To pass the second stage, your whole team needs to reach the end of the training ground behind the stall in 5 days, with at least one of every kind of chip. And before anyone managed to raise their hands to ask a question, the proctor added, you will be monitored during the test. You all signed up for this, so everything is allowed to complete your mission. If you want to back out, now it's the time. I swear I heard someone say, cool. What's wrong with these people? Hannah started walking towards the stall when I stopped her. Trying to outthink the second stage. In my head, I ran over the instructions that we had just been given, making a comparison with what was implied. Take the chips in the training ground and reach the end of it. I summed up. Only, the proctor didn't say when we could start gathering the chips. I looked at the stall. There was a Jonin giving them away, so I didn't wish to test my plan against him. I started gesturing. Shin, take it. Hana, memory smells. And before they could question my orders, I clapped my hands, plastering a goofy smile on my face. And channeling my own inner Naruto, I pointed at Shin. You on cue duty. Since you're boring, I said at a normal volume, which meant everyone was listening, hoping to get information on the competition. I turned towards Hana. You on, noting anyone duty. Quote. She frowned. She had no idea what I was doing, but she trusted me to have a plan. She whined, and grumbled something under her voice. She even growled a bit, before crossing her arms and pointedly looking away from me. And you, Shin drawled, already walking towards the forming line. I'll make us friends, I exclaimed, raising my hands in the air. For the following half an hour, I mingled, annoying the shit out of everyone, but when I started telling raunchy jokes, on one side I disgusted someone, on the other people were cracking up. And for shinobi trained to not show emotions, it was kind of a big deal. Shin went back to Hana, occasionally rocking in the balls on his feet, and making a show of giving the chip to our favorite kunoichi. With a skip in my step, I joined them while the proctor divided us into smaller groups, who would enter the training ground through different gates. We got lined up with one of the youngest groups. They were from Iowa. When I got a close look at their kunoichi, who was in line for the chip while I was mingling, I froze. She had pink eyes, no pupil, only 2 or 3 years older than Sasuke. Kuratsuchi. I sighed. Bloody hell, what's up with people so eager to climb the ladder? We were led to a stone gate already opened for us, led inside with the end of the training ground that you must reach from here, it's somewhere north. Very specific. I rolled my eyes. As soon as the gate closed behind us, the Iowa Genins pounced on us, and before my teammates could butcher the fools, I moved. To the Genin eyes, I simply disappeared, no blur, no telling twitch of my muscles, simply, I was no longer there. I was behind them and kicked their legs out from beneath them, making them fall to the ground. They were good enough to slam their arms down and turn an embarrassing fall into sloppy handstands. Attacking someone you know nothing about is the pinnacle of stupidity. I lectured them with a bored tone. What would your families say? The Iowa team scrambled to get on guard, each of the kids assuming what I supposed was their standard taijutsu stance. Relax, I said, raising my hands in a soothing gesture. Shin, Hana, north, full tilt, I said out loud, while my hand quickly gestured. Targets stolen before, and once again I lamented the existence of a less than satisfactory vocabulary in the combat sign language Hana had created years before. It was a Team 10 thing on which I had insisted a lot. Still, it could be better. But they want a fight. Hana cooed at the younger Genins. And there was this thing I wanted to test on a human target. Shin argued. You are not deep frying the Tsuchikage's granddaughter while we are in Iowa, Shin. I reprimanded him. Besides, Kuro-chan looks kind of cute, with her pigtails and whatnot. I kept going when literally everyone's jaws fell on the ground. Why? Stammered the boy on Kuratsuchi's side. While nobody from Team 10 had exuding intent, it was pretty clear that we could have butchered them without breaking a sweat. And they probably grew up with horror stories in which the yellow flash was the monster. I didn't come to Iowa to children. I gruffed as an answer. I grabbed my teammates by the shoulders and yanked them towards the north. Then I spoke to the Iowa Genin, who were sweating under the implication of my absolute dismissal of their abilities. If you make it quick to the objective, you're in for a gift. And I started running, followed by my teammates, at a speed that no genin could hope to match unless he too trained extensively under Might Guy for the better part of 4 years. The terrain was rock. Period. I distantly heard the trickle of a little course of water, but otherwise the training ground we were crossing was simply a plain crisscrossed by trenches, burrows, and likely tunnels. Probably filled to the brim with the strange kind of dangerous animals that enjoyed to populate training grounds. Very much like the Forest of Death, or Training Ground 44, in Konoha. After a while, I could feel their eyes boring into my back. I sighed. Okay. Questions. Why are we heading to the endpoint already? Hannah asked. I presume it has something to do with your making friends while I was in line. Shino commented. I smiled smugly. You guys remember that I'm good at stealing, right? They stood silent for a second, letting my answer sinking in, before snickering. You pickpocketed them. Hannah laughed. And you started to mingle before everyone had returned from the line so you wouldn't have raised suspicion, Shin commented. I could tell that he was actually impressed. And that thing with the Iowa team? He then asked. I raised an eyebrow. I don't want Onoki to fall on our backs like a ton of bricks. I explained in a tone that conveyed how stupid the question was. I meant how did you know her name, and that she is the Tsuchikage's granddaughter. He clarified with an annoyed tone. Ha, I'll rile you up even if you're drunk. I listen when I walk. I smoothly lied. The granddaughter of Onoki taking the exam was being whispered at every corner since we arrived, and I put it together with the way the other Iowa genins looked at her. I lied smoothly. And about the Chan part? Hannah asked with an unreadable expression on her face. To freak them out. Everyone is big on honorifics, so many and so complex that makes only easier to offend someone. I shrugged. You're strange, Daiki. Shin accused me. It wasn't the worst thing I've ever been told, and not far from the truth either. We crossed another team along the way. They were setting an ambush of some kind. We didn't bother engaging them. 9 hours later we reached our objective. Hannah's unnaturally developed sense of direction was more than enough to guide us the right way. We stopped before a tall stone gate, immediately noticing the 3 podiums where we were to place our honestly earned wooden chips. Hey, before going on, can we play a prank on the competition? I offered, grinning madly. Hannah, sweet Hannah, smiled mischievously in my direction. Am I the only one who thinks we are vastly overpowered to attend the exams? Shin asked rhetorically out of the blue, but he was already taking out a scroll from his pouch. So, I can set 15 lethal traps, 12 non-lethal ones, or I can rearrange what I have to make up 8 very embarrassing ones. Obviously, we all agreed on the last option. Wait, let's make one where they have to get drunk to obtain a chip. Hannah suggested. Shouldn't we thin the competition? Shin objected. I shrugged. The more the merrier. Besides, if the first stage was about gathering information, the second about survival, I think. The third will likely be a tournament. The more the opponents, the more chances Konoha has to show off. And so, we spent another 3 hours making humiliating traps that held a wooden chip as a prize. Shin started snickering halfway through and we had to stop to regain our composure. During our work, Hannah and I followed Shin's instructions to the letter. It wasn't like we weren't able to make a trap of some kind, but ours were mostly obvious and brutal, while Shin guided us to create insidious and invisible ones. At the end of our work I placed the 3 wooden chips on their respective podiums and the stone gate opened for us. The proctor greeted us with a cold tone that did nothing to hide his annoyance at us. Hey, we were being fast-tracked to Tokubetsu Jonin, it's not anyone's fault. I sarcastically commented in my head. In the next hall there is food, there is a staircase that will lead you to the lower floors, where there are free rooms if you need to rest. You cannot leave this building for the next 5 days. We all nodded. The orders were quite simple. Can we go on the roof? You know, fresh air. I couldn't contain myself. The proctor turned on himself and walked away without another word. 5 days later, we spent the days in a comfortable routine. Once chosen the biggest room available, we left it together only for eating. One of us would keep guard on the door, one rested, and one performed light exercises or meditation. It was difficult for me to train my fire or wind-natured change without a leaf to check on my results, but I made do with scraps taken from scrolls. Wind-natured chakra was important. After all, both Itachi and Sasuke were able to spit fireballs without going through the change of their chakra into a fire-natured one. The ability to change your chakra into an elemental-natured one came with 3 important perks. First, you could go and try to craft your jutsus, or simply use fire-natured to lit a candle, just bringing it to the tenketsu on your fingertips and brushing the wick. Second, it was way cheaper performing elemental jutsus in terms of chakra spent. Third, it opened the road to ninshu, which was some hazy strange shit that I didn't understand. Since the 3rd day, genins started trickling in. Most of them were a bit skittish, and the way they reacted to the sound of a wire snapping was hilarious. It confirmed that Shin's traps had hit true. They herded the teams that managed to pass the stage into a great hall, where the proctor explained the 3rd stage. A tournament after a month of vacation. Duh. But first there will be preliminary matches. You win, you get to the tournament. Lethal force is allowed, however, you'll stop at the moment the referee says so, or you will be stopped. The proctor dropped the "not news" on me with a bored tone. We proceeded to the extraction, and won again. I picked the number 7. Now, this makes me think it's rigged. I realized. My suspicion was strangely confirmed by the fact that Kuratsuchi, of all people, was to be my opponent. Either because the Sandame told Onoki about my reticence abouting, or they watched when I said I didn't want to children. Anyway, she and her team were not ready to be chunin, at least skill-wise. When I let my eyes run over the posted names, I froze. Yugito ni. Bloody ing hell. That's why she looked familiar. Only in the anime, she appears, 8 years from now. Something like that. I gulped. What was terrifying was that I knew what kind of batshit crazy stuff a Jinchuriki could throw around, and from her I could feel nothing. I didn't dare press my chakra around her to get a feel of how her chakra worked. I had learned that while it was something everyone with sufficient awareness of their chakra could do, it was also very easy to spot for those experienced enough. And the equivalent of copying a feel. Kakashi had been the one to explain it, giggling madly. I suspect that the total absence of any kind of shame annoyed him. I got that it was rude, and since then I used it only sparingly, but as long as it gave me an idea of what the person was like, I wouldn't ignore it. Hana picked Shin. And that confirmed once for all the whole, rigged, business. It wouldn't do having a single team from Konoha reaching the finals and monopolizing the show. So they played to reduce the risk. When we regrouped, Hana was looking a bit defeated. She probably wanted some time to shine. She is fast, and definitely no pushover, but one hits her hardly a way she can truly see how far she can go. We all know that Shin is stronger. She pouted. More like, better suited for open combat, I think. I gently corrected. She huffed. Ooh, off, I don't need pity. But her hand gestured, kind. In that contest, it was a, thank you. We used that to indicate when we took a non-lethal approach to an ambush, so I'd take that as a victory. Shin had a bored expression on his face. He didn't care one way or another. His preferences were traps, money, and more recently sake. The thought of surrendering to Hana didn't even cross his mind. Nor hers, for what mattered. We had to win the whole thing, Hokage's orders. He will have a stroke when he finds out about the Jinchuriki. Ha! An idea wormed its way through my brain before I could stop it. We know that I'm the most well-rounded of the group, and frankly, the one who has pushed himself further. So the lion's share of the job was mine already. I'll win it. I sighed, and my teammates turned towards me. I'll win it, I repeated. So Shin can be lazy and sit this one out, while Hana can be her usual competitive self and play with the other genins. Shin's eyebrows rose into his forehead, while Hana's mouth formed a cute, oh. I could relate with their surprise, I honestly could. It wasn't like me at all to promise to do something not necessary. Even less so that one teammate could play. But you'll owe me. Both of you, I added. I could as well try to win something out of this. And Hana, you're the one who'll explain to Sensei. I don't want Shin to be hanged on a golden rope made of youthful exuberance because he chooses to not participate. Their expressions relaxed when I added my conditions. I made deals, not favors, they were more used to it. Then we shared a good laugh on the youthful image I had suggested. Besides, there aren't many genins strong enough to give us a run for our money. I reasoned. We didn't know that, obviously, but we and the Jinchuriki were the actual monsters here, which were the possibilities of a giant unseen threat. Some genin would undoubtedly be good, but without kidding anyone or inflating my ego, my lovely Team 10 was downright scary. 7 teams passed the second stage. And while nobody pulled a kabuto, 5 people were not in a condition to continue. By the way, worthy is he. But again, the Chunin exams are held twice each year, so maybe he'll start from the next one. Or the butterfly effect is already at play here. We were 16 ready to go ahead, which meant that the tournament would be composed by 8 contestants. And if I remembered correctly, in the manga the last stage had seen 1 from Odo, the 3 from Suna, and 7 from Konoha. Now, 3 teams from Iowa had made it, Yugito's team had made it whole, another from Kiri, 1 from Suna, and finally my team. That was before the 5 wounded or exhausted ones went to the infirmary. The matches started, and I carefully observed the competition. Most of the genins had only one trick up their sleeve that allowed them to sneak their way forward. Commendable, really, versatility was one of the most useful traits to have. I dedicated a particular kind of attention to those that picked my eyes as potentially dangerous. Yugito was on top of that list. She had long, straight, blonde, hair bound with taut bandages, dark eyes, and she had yet to start wearing lipstick. She wore a long-sleeved black blouse and purple pants, both of which had a design similar to clouds on them, purple fingerless gloves and a chain of blue beads wound tightly around her right wrist. She also wore the standard Kumogakure forehead protector, sandals and a kunai holster, which was strapped to her right thigh. Her forearms were left bare, while there were bandages that kept the end of her trousers from flapping and revealing her position. A dirty white belt around her waist broke the dark colors of her figure. All in all, similar to she would one day appear but with more care to camouflage. The way she walked, however, was far more revealing. Silently, like most, if shinobi and kunoichi did subconsciously, but she lacked that. I don't care about the world vibe that fully trained Jinchuriki had. From what I knew, she had a decisive personality, but her eyes darted around a bit too much for her to be sure of herself. It stood to reason that she wasn't as powerful as she was in the manga. In it, she couldn't transform into the Nibi, so maybe she didn't even have the version 2 of the Chakra cloak yet. I certainly hoped so. It was Shin and Hana's turn. The referee gave the signal to begin, and Shin immediately surrendered. Hana squealed. She hugged him tightly while the bewildered referee decreed her as the victor. And I gleefully noticed Shin blushing. Ha! And I bet that's not the Sake's fault. I could tease them so much. Soon, it was my turn. I schooled my expression and walked down into the small arena. Kuretsuchi had jumped down from the balcony in a youthful example of enthusiasm. I stared at the girl, my eyes scanning her. Iwa Kunoichi, 135 centimeters 31 kilogram. Too young to have a niche, chakra coils not developed enough for intensive jutsus. Likely reliant on taijutsu, shuriken and kunais to compensate. Dangerous Keke Genkai and a Sweden user. I looked again on the balcony, searching for her Jonin. Kakashi hadn't bothered showing up, but the other team's senseis were ninja-ing their way around each other. Likely searching for information while letting slip half-truths and bullshits in equal measure about their home country, maybe bragging about their genins. The referee shouted, "Start." And the game was on. Because for me it was a game. I opened with a mocking smile that angered the girl. Well, there's no reason to not make friends with the next Tsuchikage, is there? She threw a smoke pellet on the ground and used the following cover to do something. I couldn't see her after all. The telltale whistling of shuriken warned me with time to spare and I simply hopped to the side, leaving the smoke cloud in the center of the arena. She tried to close the distance to engage in close combat. Is she suicidal? Then I smiled. The girl had been trained well. Her solid Bunshin was done fast and quietly, and she didn't shout her technique out loud, instead likely whispering it under the sound of the smoke sizzling. However, I had to be stupid to not notice the fizzling of the paper bomb on the back of the clone. Instead of dodging or trying to put some distance between us, I kicked her bombed Tsuchi Bunshin. The construct was hurled through the smoke, from where jumped out a startled Kunoichi a second before it exploded. A naive plan, bet well executed, I commented with an encouraging smile. And a Tsuchi Bunshin at your age, impressive. She raised her guard and glared at me, a light sheen of sweat on her forehead and her breath heavy. Probably trained to keep quiet in a fight. But it took a lot out if you, didn't it? I asked, tilting my head. I took a step forward and engaged her. Still silent. Let's see your taijutsu before wrapping this up, I offered. She kept quiet. It could have been unnerving if it didn't come from 10 years old with pigtails. I wasn't behaving like a patronizing bastard humiliating her or anything like that. I simply wanted to know what Iwa Nin were taught. It was too soon for her to have learned a style beyond the basic one they taught at the academy. So I was going to learn their basic through our little match. If there was one thing Team 10 was scary at, it was taijutsu, so we could decode a lot from the way she balanced her weight. Soon, she stopped keeping quiet because of a strategic choice and started doing it because she was out of breath. I went forward with a wide punch that she countered with a perfectly executed textbook block, her right forearm protecting her head, which had been my target, and her left arm shot forward, her punch aiming to my crotch. I raised my left knee, stopping her in her tracks, before kicking her in the gut. I was matching her speed and carefully controlling my strength, but my hit still threw her back a few steps. Your taijutsu is subpar, I noted. She had all the time to kick my leg sideways, or just sidestep. She was pressing a hand on her stomach while shaking a bit her right arm, trying to loosen up her wrist. Don't block head-on when your enemy is physically stronger than you. I lectured. And for the next 10 minutes, we fought hand to hand, and I forced her to bend, sidestep, evade, looking with meticulous attention at how she moved. I offered her openings to see how she would try to hit. I offered her more than one at the same time to see what she had been taught to prioritize. Sometimes I left obvious openings that screamed, trap. She started refusing to take them after I almost broke her arm when she had overextended herself. I brought up very gradually the speed, every couple of minutes raising it a bit. She managed to keep up nicely. Her sensei did a lot to raise her stamina. But after a while, I felt that I learned everything that I could, and she would have been dead on her feet, if not for the heavy breathing and the occasional cursing. You're good for your age. I started. You adapt well, and even if your taijutsu is crap, you adapt quickly. Your aim is mostly spot on and you recognized some of the most obvious traps. I slapped away her weak kick and swiped away the leg she was standing on. So we won't be going back home before the tournament? Hannah asked, with a great deal of annoyance in her voice. I could relate, since all the freak was doing was eye smiling. Shin unhelpfully snorted. Imagine that the Kages don't want ninja running back and forth between their domains. Oh, I didn't think of that. How insightful of you, Shin. Ma, your families and some friend will likely join Hokage-sama and his entourage when they come here for the tournament, Kakashi said. Wait, is it how it usually goes? Cages jumping in other hidden villages to see the last stage of the exams. I was confused. The cage of a village was the equivalent of the nuclear deterrent, showing him or her. As soon as a woman got the hat, your home looked like a security issue as big as Guy's youthful enthusiasm. The cages of the Great Five rarely do so, it's mostly seen as courtesy among allies. After all, many want to see the cage of another village. The Scarecrow replied. So the cages do their advertisement too. I almost snorted. And maybe they gloat over their genin if they put up a good enough show, Kakashi added, winking. How I could tell it was a wink instead of a blink, since his headband covered his Sharingan, I had no idea of. At least they let us play in some of their training grounds. Shin amended, trying to calm down Hannah. We all missed the Heimaru brothers, hell I missed even Guy over the silver-haired freak, but the Inuzuka had a strong bond with their Ninkins, it was almost symbiotic. And they probably have some surveillance on them, so that they can let know to the Iowa contestants, who will come up with something perfectly tailored for each of us. I shot him down. Shin smiled smugly at me. They can't, it's written in the Chunin Accords. The ninja from other villages will not spy while in the village hosting the exam, they will not be spied upon either. He quoted verbatim. I really should have read the exams charter before coming here. Still, it must be a security nightmare. I pointed out, looking questioningly at Kakashi who had his nose buried deep into his smut. He didn't bother to recognize my existence. Well, Shin can help Hannah train, I have my own thing to do and don't need people around. I offered. Leaving those two some alone time was a sound idea, and from the slight twitch of Kakashi's shoulder, he had caught up on my matchmaker plans. Or he had just found a raunchy joke among the steaming hot scenes. Before they could object, I flickered over to the next group of rocks. Seriously, they need someone to add a tiny bit of variety to their training grounds. Plateaus and rocks, stones, even pebbles. Everything is organized in the relation of the position of particularly striking pieces of dirt. Hell, in Konoha everyone loves trees, but we do appreciate a tiny bit of variety. Here everything is dug out from the rock. Houses and market stalls, training grounds and Tsuchikage's tower, which is the tip of the mountain a bit. I sat down cross-legged on the comfiest looking piece of dirt I could find, it wasn't comfy at all. Well, time to actually come up with some training for the next month. I muttered to myself. What could I do in a month to gain a somewhat significant power-up over my current self? Beyond keeping polishing my Sweden. In a single month, I couldn't really come up with a completely new skill. So spitting clouds of poison is out, as well as learning how to mess with the enemy nervous system through medical chakra. I could try summoning, but there were 3 problems. 1, I didn't know if I had enough chakra for it. 2, I wasn't sure of the hand signs. 3, I wasn't Naruto, who could just pump so much chakra in everything to make it work. I will keep up with chakra control exercises, there is never enough chakra control after all. It was boring, but something one had to build with years of diligent practice. Or being born with it, Cheaters, use Sakura. The same could be said for taijutsu, arguably my strongest skill, but the gates were some bullshit power-up, basically Kishimoto version of a Super Saiyan. Wait. It wasn't like the ability to unlock the gates automatically gave you the upper hand against anyone who couldn't. I could open the first 3 gates, but Guy Sensei could still go toe-to-toe with me without even touching his gate of opening. They were restrictions placed on the chakra system that contained the kind of strength the body could wield. I wouldn't end up in a hospital only because I had opened the first 4 gates. If I opened 5, I would probably tear some of my muscles, but that was it. If the body was trained enough, it could withstand the aftereffects of opening the gates without breaking apart. Lee had learned to open 5 with a year under Guy Sensei's tutelage. I took 4, but I knew my limits, and wouldn't land myself into the hospital because I couldn't pace myself once I opened the gates. Each gate was more like a dam than anything else. Opening one made more chakra flow through your coils, stressing them. It enhanced your body beyond what it naturally could handle, and that was why without extremely deep conditioning, it was impossible to do. Somehow, the effects were cumulative, exactly like the Super Saiyan I, Super Saiyan 2, Super Saiyan 3. With every gate, one's body became more and more enhanced, with chakra turbulently coursing through the coils. It felt like being a glass bottle containing a stormy sea. I went over what I knew about the gates. The gate of opening, Kaimen, located in the brain. This gate removed the restraints of the brain on the muscles so 100% of their strength can be used, whereas normally, a person could only use 20% of their muscle strength to keep them from disintegrating. The gate of healing, Shumen, Human 2, was located in the brain. Forcibly increased one's physical strength and temporarily re-energized the body. The gate of life, Shengmen, Simon, located on the spinal cord. The increased blood flow turned the skin red but also granted more oxygen coursing through the body. The gate of pain, Shangmen, Shomen, located on the spinal cord, affected the nervous system, hence its name. The orders the brain issued to the muscles traveled much faster, but also the feedback from your senses. So, pains barely felt before opening it became the equivalent of sharp instantaneous needles. And it was, if not soul-shattering painful, very uncomfortable. The sensory feedback was like touching stuff with a hand that had been kept covered in bandages for months, only much more intense. The gate of limit, Dumen, Tomen, located in the abdomen, from what I felt using it, strengthened your core muscles, making them somewhat denser. The gate of view, Jingmen, Kaimen, located in the stomach, was the following step up. With it, Guy Sensei performed the morning peacock. Opening of this gate released such enormous amounts of chakra that it could cause nearby water bodies to form a vortex around the user, but that was only stuff I knew from the manga. I suspected the chakra would flow so turbulently through the coils of the user that it made genjutsu ineffective. The gate of wonder, Jingmen, Kyomen, located below the stomach, further increased the user's speed and power, and placed Guy Sensei's body in condition of using daytime tiger. Opening it caused glowing green sweat from every inch of the body, which immediately evaporated from the sheer overheating the body was going through, creating an aura easily mistakable for chakra coating. Unfortunately, the side effects of opening the gate were that the user's muscle fibers are ripped to shreds, causing intense pain if anything or anyone touches them. The gate of death, Men, Shimon, located at the heart. It basically burned your own life force. I could keep up the first gate open for 15 minutes before straining myself, the second one for 10 minutes, the third for 8 minutes, the fourth for 3 minutes, and the fifth for a single minute. I was able to push those limits forward, but not without hurting myself. Learning to open another gate was just plain stupid. I could not learn to do so reliably in a month, so I should just focus on raising my tolerance. I thought. But how to do it? Only physical training would not grant me any significant power up with only a month of work. Work smarter, not harder, I tried to remind myself. Like I often did when I was lost, I ran over my own recent thoughts. Super Saiyan. Didn't Goku do some shit before his fight with Cell that allowed him to stay blonde without issues? And a normal Super Saiyan had anger issues, while my chakra gets turbulent with the gates opened. I muttered. Only one way to know for sure, I thought, and so I started my new training. A month later, the Hokage and his entourage arrived with little warning, literally appearing out of nowhere in front of Iwa's main gate. My team and I were waiting into the plaza after the giant stone doors when it happened, and the happy chatter of the market and carefree civilians turned into an excited one. Most of the older people paled, realizing that a cage with a group of ninjas hopping out of nowhere at your home's doorstep was a threat, nothing more, nothing less. Onoki himself had come flying, literally, from his tower, not a second after one of the Chunin guards had made known the outsider's appearance. The stone doors opened and Kakashi appeared at our side. I raised an eyebrow in his direction, but he simply stared towards the entering entourage. Hiruzen Sarutobi spearheaded the group in his ceremonial white and red robes, his hat hiding his piercing eyes. Walking behind the Hokage, on the left, Guy Sensei was wearing his serious face along with his usual attire, while Sum Inuzuka was, stalking forward, with a cautious expression on her face. Her one-eyed, four-legged companion gave a deep growl to the Heimaru brothers, who had smelled Hana and were having difficulties in staying put. There was also a detail of 6 Anbu guards, but really, after Sarutobi and Guy's sensei presence they felt kind of dim. I could feel their presence only because they wanted to be seen. It probably would have been rude otherwise, keeping your presence hidden in a visiting hidden village. Bad form. The Tsuchikage was short. His hat as large as his shoulders, but he too was letting himself be perceived. And he was so damn heavy, even when floating in the air. I was too far to overhear what I supposed were customary greetings between cages, but I was floored nevertheless. Rapping in Japanese should not exist. It's a crime, period. Strolling through the gates and approaching the 2 cages, and accompanied by 6 of his Anbu, b. Dark skin and a muscular build, as well as blonde hair and a goatee. On his right shoulder, he had a tattoo of the kanji for iron, Tetsu. Is that the iron armor seal that was used to seal Gyuki into him? I wondered. Killer B wore oval-shaped sunglasses, his village's standard one-strap over one-shoulder flak jacket, and a long, red rope belt tied around his waist, the standard Kumo hand and shin guards, shinobi sandals, and a white scarf around his neck. And he actually carried 7 swords on his back. At that point I had stalked over to greet my cage, along with my teammates. I told him, I won't overstep the line. And it will be mighty fine. He happily rapped on. I wanted to laugh at the absurdity of the situation, and the sheer potential for destruction held within Iwa's walls made me a bit skittish. 2 Kumo Jinchuriki, 2 rival cages, likely 2 Iwa Jinchuriki around somewhere. It was a bomb ready to go off, and one of the heavy hitters was rapping bullshit. I couldn't avoid thinking that if Iwa and Kumo had struck a deal, they could cut Konoha's head without hassle, before moving the war to my home country. I was bowing to Sarutobi when another voice joined the chatter. Well, hello, I am not late, am I? But how could I? After all, the gallant Jiraiya is always in the right place at the right time. The situation had just taken an important turn. If for the better or the worse, I couldn't tell just yet. After the brief greeting of our own cage, and more importantly of the Heimaru brothers and Guy Sensei, we dodged the rowdy behavior of Sum and moved to the arena. A few Jonin censors from Iwa checked our identities and led us into a balcony that let us watch the matches. The terrain was rocky, but it had a small stream of water running on one side of it. Stream might have been a bit generous, it was more like a trickle. I let my gaze fall upon the honor balcony, where the Kage's Onder B sat, along with the Kiri representative. I didn't recognize him, but I knew little of Mizu no Kuni. I knew nothing beyond the Sanbi Jinchuriki Kage being under Genjutsu and oppressing the people. And that their next Kage would be a total babe. My eyes roamed over the crowd waiting to assist to the pointless bloodshed and found my sensei talking to Shin, who was slumped back in his seat. He really is enjoying his sake, the lazy cunt. I pointed it out to Hana, which frowned in disapproval. She was still bitchy because she had too little time to play with the Heimaru brothers. There were 8 of us, Hana and I from Konoha, Yugito from Kumo, 1 weedy shinobi from Kiri, and 3 from Iwa. I glanced at the giant display where our names were being swapped around normally, choosing the couples of the matches. My name flashed along with another that I didn't recognize, but the way the Iowa kid was rolling his shoulders with anticipation identified my first adversary for me. I would be in the opening match, the Kiri shinobi against the Iowa kunoichi would follow, Yugito would face the other Iowa shinobi, and lastly Hana would square it off with the last Iowa nin. I briefly touched the big scroll hanging on my back, and glanced over my attire before walking down into the arena. I had pulled all the stops and put on the results of the shopping spree I went on once I had returned to Konoha from patrol duty. I wore a form-fitting black shirt with a deep hood and long sleeves under a traditional armor, very similar to the one Tobirama used to wear, only without the fur. My standard cargo blackish pants were wrapped around my calves by white bandages, and I wore black sandals. I had finally understood why so many shinobis and kunoichis preferred them over boots of every kind. The feet needed to breathe, I found out during our week-long speed run when I didn't have time to change socks. I had 2 kunai pouches strapped around my left tight, one contained kunais with paper bombs wrapped around the handles, spools of ninja wire in a big pocket, senbons in a pouch on my right tight. A belt was strapped around my shoulders, holding in place at the height of my waist a big scary scroll. Forearms and shins guards were in place, while I stopped wearing gloves. My Hitai 8 was on my forehead, showing to the world my allegiance. But I actually wanted it there. Hell, if I could wear a helmet without impairing my movements I would have. My weights were in a scroll with my other belongings, tied around Alpha's neck. That dog was awesome. I reached the middle of the arena and tuned out the proctor and the crowd, taking in my adversary. Iowa Shinobi. 17. 170 centimeters 60 kilogram. No remarkable features, wrappings around wrists suggest heavy punch-based taijutsu, but the shoulders look underdeveloped for it. Likely a trap. Basically, I knew nothing about him. I briefly regretted not spending some of the last month gathering info on the enemies I would be facing, but I had been too thrilled by my training to care. My preoccupations and disgust for being paraded in an arena faded into the background of my mind. I was focused, and acutely aware that mistakes of any kind could cost me my life. Every sound that wasn't made by my opponent was erased from my awareness. Even Hana. Shouts of faith in my skills. The referee gave the start and jumped back. The Iowa shinobi shot forward trying to engage me into a melee, but my hands already blurred through hand seals. Tiger, monkey, dragon, boar, ram. I quickly and steadily shaped my yin chakra and slipped into the enemy, coils through his tenketsus. Genjutsu. Anbaransu, I whispered. And suddenly the Iowa nin ran into the ground face first. At that moment I knew that I wouldn't be breaking a sweat against him. The genjutsu I had just used was a curious one. It was usually used by med nins to test the answer of the patient's cerebellum to a sudden shift in balance. My yin chakra had slipped into the Iowa nin's brain, affecting the part that handled the answering to the information provided by the internal ear. Anbaransu meant unbalance. And it was The shinobi threw his arms around for a couple of seconds before his hands found each other. He formed a ram seal and disrupted his own chakra enough to slip through the genjutsu. In the meantime, I threw a kunai that embedded itself into the ground, less than a centimeter from the shinobi's head, and I watched the referee with a bored expression. He didn't say anything, and the Iowa shinobi was on his feet again and charged at me again with a wordless scream. I molded my chakra with the ease fruit of years of practice, and without hand seals, I kawaraimed with the kunai I had embedded on the ground. Kawarimi was another seriously underrated jutsu. It was most effective when you changed your position with a body most similar to yours. The thing you kawaraimed with must not have chakra of its own, but besides that rule and distance-related restrictions, there were no limitations. That was why a lot of Konoha nin performed it with logs. Organic matter, roughly similar mass. And it was simply a matter of yanking it from a tree's branch. The similarities between a human body and a piece of still alive wood, of similar mass, were enough to make the chakra cost of it negligible as well. Using a kunai for it was stupid unless you had exceptional reflexes and a chakra control worthy of a med nin. Why the exceptional reflexes? Because mass mattered, and kawariming with a kunai meant having the rubber band flinging you into position instead of swapping. Kawariming with something a lot bigger than you was a chakra-intensive shit nobody reasonably tried to do. Kawarimi was almost like using a stretched rubber band to tie yourself to something before letting it do its job, effectively swapping your places. Proving that he was not completely stupid, the Iowa nin immediately turned on himself and came at me again, his hands moving through hand seals. Again, I shaped my chakra. I jumped back, performing a swiping high kick, and kawaraimed once again. Recognizing my repeated technique, the Iowa genin was already coming at me, ready to spit something, when the sole of my sandal slammed on his face, flattening his nose and hurling him back. I took a deep breath while he was still flying and started changing my chakra. I shoot another bored look, only not at the referee, who was keeping quiet, but at the honor balcony. I couldn't make out their facial expressions, but Sarutobi adjusted his hat. I had no idea if there was some hidden meaning in it. I inhaled deeply, my hands slowly moving through hand seals: boar, horse, tiger. The chakra burned hot through the tenketsu at the base of my throat. When my lungs were full, I whispered, "Kaden, Gokaku no Jutsu," and blew toward the Iowa nin, who had performed a handstand and just landed on his feet. The fireball formed in front of me and shot forward. I separated my hands and cut off the chakra flow into the technique. It was far from perfect, but it was still the size of a desk. I coughed discreetly. That jutsu always leaves my throat raw. It meant I still had some work to do on it. I stood still, waiting for the other genin to clumsily dodge the fireball. His nose was bleeding and he was covered in dirt. He was also snarling. But really, he was low. One could be the next Hashirama, but being slow meant dying. Period. Unless you were Tsunade, but she was the exception, and I wasn't sure she was slow or not. The Iowa nin repeated his hand seals and slammed his palms on the ground, hissing something under his breath. I couldn't hear him, since I was 15 meters away. At least someone taught him that shouting your techniques doesn't make them any stronger. Still, it was a Doden jutsu, so when a spear of rock shot towards me from the ground, I leaned on one side and dodged it, before ducking under a second and sidestepping the third. The Iowa nin watched me with his mouth open. I tilted my head questioningly. Then I realized that he was simply baffled by my speed. Without weights I feel lighter than air. His shoulders had slumped down, already accepting defeat, but his expression tightened in one of determination. He wanted to go down swinging. I sighed, Without leaving him out of my sight, I allowed my focus to dim a bit, taking in once again the shouts from the crowd. There was a lot of encouragement going on for my opponent. Good for him, I thought. Then I ran forward as fast as I could and slammed my knee in his gut, and once he bent forward I hit the base of his neck with my elbow. He slumped on the ground, unconscious. Before the referee could call the match I threw another kunai at his head, this time grazing his ear. The referee was immediately at my side, this time with a reproachful look on his face. Daiki from Konoha wins the match. I raised an eyebrow, his disapproval washed over me. I was unimpressed, I humiliated him, but he was very much alive and in working condition. Really? Kaden, was Hannah's reaction, but she was smiling a second after and congratulated me. She caught on my wish to keep my sweetened secret for later. We shared a green and watched the following match. It was the weedy Kiri shinobi facing the rather forgettable Iwa Kunoichi who was glaring daggers at me. Probably the poor sod's teammate. I would have been angry too if someone had tossed around my teammates like a ragdoll. She hopped down the balcony and reached the Kiri shinobi in the center of the arena. I watched carefully. I would be facing the winner of this match in the semifinals after all. When the referee gave the start, the Kiri shinobi fainted toward the Iwa Kunoichi before flickering over the small water stream and performing a few hand seals. He's fast, Hannah commented. Indeed, I replied. And he was fast. Almost as fast as me. But I had no doubts that he was hiding his best tricks, just like I did. The small stream rose from the ground while the Iwa Kunoichi started pelting her adversary with an impressive dance made of shuriken and ninja wire. And she is the strongest of her team, Hannah observed. The difference between her and the teammate I faced was as vast as it was obvious. Not only in the way she handled her weaponry, but in the way she chooses to test her enemy keeping her distance. She's at least less stupid. I snorted. It was a standard procedure. The mist enveloped the couple, and the civilian part of the audience booed. They could no longer see teasing each other. I scoffed, earning myself a confused look from Hannah. Then she followed my eyes and sighed. They're civilians, you can hardly blame them if they want a show. She misunderstood me. I looked the ninjas in the crowd, mostly watching attentively commenting among themselves about the techniques their enhanced senses could pick up. I listened to the clashing of metal against metal, the occasional thud and let myself feel the flaring of their two very different chakras colliding. She is much better than her teammate. I amended my previous statement. Suddenly, the Kunoichi's chakra vanished from my senses and I grimaced. The mist fell apart and the Kiri shinobi was standing over his opponent's headless body. I pushed apart my dislike for the situation and I frowned, focusing on what was important. Hannah's expression mirrored mine. How did he decapitate her without anything resembling a blade? She asked me. A strange kind of garrote or the very skillful use of ninja wire. I supplied it immediately. Maybe she's wind-natured. Wind can do some strange shit. I added, recalling Osamu's demonstration in the manga. The Kiri shinobi returned to our balcony. His face was blank, but he seemed quite content of the splattered blood all over him. I looked him over, searching for revealing bulges under his clothes, telling calluses, or hidden weapons. Nothing. He was somewhat adequate. The next ones in the arena were Yuguto and the other Iwa shinobi. I took the few moments before the beginning of the match to gesture to Hannah. Information gathering. Follow. She quirked her eyebrow at me, but I was already talking, so she immediately understood that I had just asked her to back me up. It was time to mess with my next opponent, and squeezing my knowledge of the future for all it was worth I asked. Nay, don't you find strange that from all the Kiri ninjas there wasn't a single one with a Keke Genkai? I was discreetly observing the shinobi from Mizu no Kuni when I said that, so I noticed the minute tensing of his stance and, more importantly, the shift in his chakra. He was probably on an assassination team since he could keep his character disguised very well, but there was no mistaking the sudden feel of watchfulness that exuded from him. It is a bit strange. Hana agreed. They do have some infamous ones after all. Which were them again? The ones with the bones. The Kage, yeah, one of the 3 founder clans of Kiri, if I remember it right. I drawled. Then the match began and I turned my attention towards the Jinchuriki. Naruto had all the subtlety of a sledgehammer, was stupid, and had lousy chakra control, but fighting someone that basically didn't run out of chakra was a problem. Hana too was carefully watching the match. Yugito had already engaged in a melee, her nails black and 20 centimeters long scraping against the kunais and armguards of her adversary. Taijutsu specialist. Hana analyzed, her lips parting to reveal her sharper than normal canines. Then she narrowed her eyes when she took notice of Yugito's pattern of attacks. The Kumo's girl has no hope. Daisuke is the best in taijutsu. The only remaining Iowa shinobi sniffed. Then a blaze of blue fire engulfed Yugito's opponent and the sarcastic comment I was preparing died down. Whying him? I sighed. There was so much wrong with these people. Then I glared murder to the cheering crowd. Disgusting. Hana was unaffected by the display, but she was tactful enough to not poke fun at the Iowa shinobi she was about to face. I watched Yugito with a blank expression, but not hiding my disapproval either. She locked her eyes with mine and we entered a staring contest, ignoring the beginning of Hana's fight completely. When the Kumo Kunoichi finally arched an eyebrow, it took it as a victory and bluntly asked, "Why him? You were clearly superior enough to subdue him without unnecessary bloodshed." She slowly tilted her head, suddenly reminding me of a cat. Did the Nibi bleed over? I knew that the Bijus were not inherently evil, but sure as hell they didn't care about humans. And obviously, whatever shit happened to Yugito in the manga to make her approachable hadn't happened yet. She offered a predatory smile that confirmed my fear. At the loud cheering, I turned my attention to the center of the arena, where a ruffled Hana was standing over a slumped form, cradling her left arm like it was broken. Technically, it would be my turn immediately after they left the arena, but I didn't care, and hopped down to the Mednans taking care of her in the corridor that led to the stairs which opened the way to the contestants' balcony. I rushed over, taking in the bored expression on the Iowa Mednin's face. She rolled her eyes at my appearing at her side instead of being in the arena. "Just go." She interrupted me. And my name was being called by the referee, so I just squeezed Hana's not injured hand and went ahead. She owes me a favor, doesn't she? I can use it to have her surrender against Yugito instead of getting herself. I planned, and I soon found myself into the arena, facing the Kiri shinobi. I was distracted, and had to talk with Hana before her match, so I wanted to get it done quickly. In the moment the referee gave the start and jumped back, I let go of the hold I kept on the first gate. "Kaiman, Kai," I whispered. It required the same effort of snapping my fingers. A split second later I was on the Kiri shinobi, who simply hadn't time to react in any way beyond widening his eyes. My elbow slammed against his temple and he went down. Simply as that. Without closing the gate, I ran to the contestants' balcony, ignoring the referee calling my victory. Hana was looking at me with a sly grin on her face. She opened her mouth to comment about my bloodthirstiness, but I cut her off. "I'm calling in my favor. If things get too hard against your next opponent, don't escalate, surrender." I whispered to her in a conceited tone. She frowned, offended by my request. "You don't think I can win?" she replied, her tone hurt. She took a step back from me, but I grabbed her not hurt wrist, preventing her to further the distance between us. "It's not that. Even if it's true. Please, just trust me on this." She has an arm in a cast, too. She moved her hand in a clockwise motion, freeing herself. Why should I? And she showed me her teeth in a way that was as far from a smile as it was possible, regressing to the most basic expression of aggressivity her clan was capable of. It's clear that you don't trust me. She hissed, and jumped down the balcony, kicking away my hand that was trying to grab her at the same time. I grabbed the rail and was about to follow her when I was yanked back. I spun as fast as I could, my right leg sweeping low and my right arm already jabbing forward to crush the trachea of whoever was so stupid to surprise a shinobi in a stressful moment. My right wrist was grabbed in a steely hold and my right leg impacted painfully against the shin of the one behind me. A spat with your girlfriend is not a reason to lash out to the concerned super pervert. Jiraiya of the Sannin lectured me. He was a tall and well-built man. He had waist-length, spiky white hair tied back into a ponytail, with two shoulder-length bangs framing his face. There were red lines under his eyes which extended further down his face, going all the way to the bottom. Wrinkles around the corners of his mouth and a wart on the left side of his nose. He was in his usual attire, which consisted of a green short shirt kimono and matching pants, under which he wore mesh armor that was visible at his wrists and ankles. He also wore handguards, a black belt, traditional Japanese wooden sandals, and a red haori with two yellow circles on each side. He carried a large scroll on his back. He wore a horned forehead protector with the kanji for oil, abura. I knew who he was, I knew what he was capable of. That didn't stop me from trying to toss him out of my way and going to Hana's side. Hana was going to get herself. I stopped thinking. My right leg bent and I tried to kick his knee out of place while I applied the same clockwise motion with my right hand, freeing my wrist. I shot my hand forward again, a chakra scalpel forming on my fingertips. He was surprised, I could tell, but with the same ease I had dispatched Kuretsuchi, he had pinned me down an instant later. I tried to lash out in any way but I could no longer feel my chakra. Ing Seal Masters. Immediately, my mind went in overdrive, I was almost in a frenzy. I couldn't free myself. So, convincing him it was. She's going to get herself. I hissed. The Sannin looked at me with an unreadable expression. And how would you know that? In my frenzy, I suddenly found again my calm. I shouldn't know that she's a Jinchuriki, should I? Because she and the rapping guy have a strange as bloodline, she's dangerous, and Hana is for one hit and escape tactics, not face-to-face battle, and she's injured. I spoke quickly. The man tilted his head, his spiky white mane following the movement. And what do you propose I do? Let you jump in and break the Chunin charter, throwing us into another war with Iwa. And Kumo too, for what matters? I heard a scream. Hana. I tried to break whatever shit he had placed on me but I really had no idea how to go about it, I could move only my head. But it wasn't true, I was breathing, I was alive, that meant that my heart was working and that my diaphragm was moving. Moving muscles meant that only the muscles I contracted consciously were out of my control. Maybe I could do something. I expect you to save a kunoichi from the leaf. Order her to surrender, I said, desperately looking for something into the eyes of the toad sage. If understanding or pity, I didn't know. I couldn't even feel what was happening in the arena since I was cut off from my own chakra. You all signed up for this. Death was a possible conclusion, but it was her choice. He answered. She's been bred and raised to Embiid, she doesn't know a choice exists. I snarled back. Either let me go or help me. The crowd started screaming. And I couldn't see anything, pinned on the ground as I was. She's free to surrender at any time. Jiraiya pointed out, then glanced over the rail to see what was happening. Not that she looks willing to do so. Before I could answer, he went on. The best you can do for your teammate is cheering for her, like everyone from Konoha is doing. I narrowed my eyes. Will you let me go if I cheer for her? The Sannin arched an eyebrow and smirked. I'm not stupid. His answer was clear. I tried to fall into myself. The gates were something one could open only through gruesome training, reaching a level of self-awareness, of proprioception, capable of giving you a feel of the gates. Since they weren't something one was simply aware of. Then it came the more complex part of managing to open them. At first it was like breaking down a door. With time, one grew used to it enough that the breaking door became a dam bursting open. My training had loosened the dam. For me, opening the first gate was more similar to cutting a single string, and closing it required roughly half an hour of meditation. But all the extra chakra flowing through my body was no longer turbulent, fast, yes, it stretched the capacity of my coils, yes, but it was steady. Once I got really used to the first gate, I would replicate the same training with the other gates, until I managed the first 5 or 6, the last 2 were not something a human body could handle. Since my body was still maturing, it should even increase my chakra capacity, since my coils were still developing. Anyway, opening the gates was not a direct manipulation of your chakra, so it should have bypassed the seals that I couldn't perceive that Jiraiya had placed on me. I tried, like I had planned to do, to free myself in the first stage. But it didn't work. Let me see her. I growled when the crowd went, ooh, again. The Sannin rose me from the ground and kept me right, holding on the scruff of my neck. I still could move only my head. Maybe he's doing something through my tenketsu and it's not a seal.